Section 23 of the Bagpipers by George Sand, translated by Catherine Prescott Wormley. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. 23rd Evening. "You are a downright bachor, my friend," said my aunt to Uriel, giving him a push away from Brulette, whom he had approached in much excitement. Then, taking her niece's hands, she soothed her and asked her very gently to tell her the real meaning of it all. "If your grandfather were here," she said, "he would explain what there is between you and this stranger lad, and we could then leave the matter to his judgment. But since I am here now as father and mother both, you must confide in me. Do you wish me to put an end to this pursuit? Shall I, instead of inviting this brute or this rogue, for I don't know which to call him, tell him that he must let you alone?" "Exactly," said Uriel. "That's what I want. I want her to say what she wishes, and I will obey her without anger, and she shall still retain my friendship and respect. If she thinks me a brute or a rogue, let her pack me off. Speak, Brulette. I shall always be your friend and servant. You know that very well." "Be what you will," said Brulette at last, rising and giving him her hand. "You protected me in danger, and you have suffered such troubles on my account, that I neither can nor will refuse so little a thing as to dance with you as much as you like." "But think what your aunt has said," replied Uriel, holding her hand. "You will be talked of, and if nothing good comes of it between us, which on your side may still be, any plan you may have for another marriage would be destined or delayed." "Well, that is a less danger than the one you threw yourself into on my account," said Brulette. "Aunt, please excuse me," she added, "if I cannot explain matters just now, but believe that your niece loves and respects you, and will never give you reason to blush for her." "I am certain of that," said my aunt. "But what answer am I to give to the questions they will be sure to ask?" "None at all, aunt," said Brulette resolutely. "I can afford to put up with all their talk. You know I am in the habit of doing so." "Thank you, darling of my heart," cried Uriel, kissing her hand 6 or 7 times. "You shall never repent what you have granted to me." "Are you coming, you obstinate fellow?" said my aunt. "I can't stay away any longer, and if I don't carry Brulette down there at once, the bride is capable of leaving the wedding and coming after her." "Go down, Brulette," cried Terence, "and leave the baby with me. I promise I will take care of him." "Won't you come too, my handsome Bourbonnaise?" said my aunt, who could not keep her eyes off Terence. "I count upon you." "I will go later, my good woman," replied Terence. "But just now I want to give my brother suitable clothes in which to do honour to your invitation, for as you see we are still in our travelling things." My aunt carried off Brulette, who wanted to take Charlot, but Terence insisted on keeping him, wishing to leave her brother free with his darling without the trouble and annoyance of a small child. This was not at all satisfactory to Charlot, who set up a yell when he saw that Brulette was leaving him, and fought with all his strength in Terence's arms. But she, looking at him with a grave and determined manner, said quietly, "You must be quiet, my boy. You must, you know." Charlot, who had never been ordered in his life, was so astonished at her tone that he gave in immediately. But as I saw that Brulette was distressed at leaving him with a girl who had never in her life touched a baby, I promised to bring him to her myself if there should be the least trouble, and persuaded her to go with our good little aunt, who was getting impatient. Uriel, urged by his sister, went off to his room to shave and dress, and I, left alone with Terence, helped her to unpack her boxes and shake out the clothes, while Charlot, quite subdued, stood with open mouth looking on. When I had carried Uriel the clothes which Terence piled on my arms, I returned to ask if she didn't mean to dress herself too, and to offer to take the child to walk while she did so. "As for me," she said, laying out her finery on her bed, "I will go if Brulette worries after me, but I will admit that if she would only forget me for a time, I would prefer to stay quietly here. In any case, I can be ready in a minute, and I need no one to escort me. I am accustomed to hunt up and get ready our lodgings in travelling, like a regular quartermaster on a campaign, and nothing disturbs me wherever I am." "Then you don't like dancing?" I said, "or is it shyness at making new acquaintances that makes you wish to stay at home?" "No, I don't like dancing," she replied, "nor the racket, nor the suppers, and particularly not the waste of time which brings weariness." "But one doesn't love dancing for dancing's sake only. Do you fear or dislike the attentions the young men pay to the girls?" "No, I have neither fear nor repugnance," she said simply. "It does not amuse me, that is all. I am not witty like Brulette. I don't know how to answer patly, nor how to make other people talk, and I can't be amusing. I am stupid and dreamy, and I am as much out of place in a lively company as a wolf or a fox at a dance." "You don't look like a wolf or any other villainous beast, and you dance as gracefully as the willow branches when the breeze caresses them." I don't know what more I was going to say when Uriel came out of his room, handsome as the sun and more in a hurry to get off than I was, for I should have been just as satisfied to stay with his sister. She kept him a moment to straighten his cravat and to tie his garters at the knee, apparently not thinking him jaunty enough to dance through the wedding with Brulette, and as she did so she said, "Tell me, why were you so jealous of her dancing with anyone but you? Were you not afraid of frightening her with such masterful orders?" "Tiennet!" exclaimed Uriel, stopping short in what he was doing and taking Charlot, whom he placed on the table and gazed at with all his eyes. "Whose child is this?" Thérence, astonished, first asked him what he meant by the question, and then asked me why I did not answer it. We looked each other in the eyes, like three dolts, and I would have given all I had to know how to answer, for I saw that a sword was hanging over our heads. At last, recollecting the virtue and truth I had seen that very afternoon in my cousin's eyes, when I had pretty nigh asked her the same question, I plucked up courage, and going straight to the point, I said to Uriel, "Comrade, if you ask that question in our village, many persons will tell you he is Brulette's child." He did not let me say more, but picking up the boy, he felt him and turned him over as a hunter examines a head of game. Fearing his anger, I tried to take the child from him, but he held him firmly, saying, "No fear for the poor innocent thing. My heart is not bad, and if I saw any resemblance to her, I might not be able to refrain from kissing him, though I should hate the fate that brought me to it. But there is no such resemblance. My blood runs neither the hotter nor the colder with this child in my arms." "Tiennet, Tiennet, answer him," cried Thérence, as if waking from a dream. "Answer me, too, for I don't know what all this means, and it makes me wild to think of it. There is no stain on our family, and if my father believed—" Uriel cut her short. "Wait, sister," he said. "A word too much is soon said. It is for Tiennet to speak. Come, Tiennet, you who are an honest man, tell me, 1, 2, whose child is that?" "I swear to God I don't know," I answered. "If it were hers, you would know?" "I think she could not have hidden it from me." "Did she ever hide anything else?" "Never." "Does she know the parents of the child?" "Yes, but she will not even let me question her about them." "Does she deny the child is hers?" "No one has ever dared to ask her." "Not even you?" Thereupon I related in a few words what I knew and what I believed, and finished by saying, "I can find no proof for or against Brulette, but for the life of me I cannot doubt her." "Nor I either," said Uriel, and kissing Charlot, he set him on the floor. "Nor I either," exclaimed Thérence. "But why should this idea have come into people's heads? Why into yours, brother, as soon as you looked at the child? I did not even think of asking whether it were Brulette's nephew or cousin. I thought it must belong to the family, and seeing it in her arms made me wish to take it in mine." "I see I must explain," said Uriel, "though the words will scorch my mouth. But no," he added, "I would rather tell it. It will be the first and the last time, for my mind is made up, whatever the truth may be and whatever happens. You must know, Thérence, that 3 days ago, when we were parting with Joseph at Montaigu, and you know with what a light heart I left him, he was cured, he gave her up, he asked you in marriage, and Brulette was still free. He knew she was, and said so, and when I spoke of her, he answered, 'Do what you like, I no longer love her. You can love her without hurting me.' Well, sister, at the very moment we were parting, Joseph caught me by the arm as you were getting into the cart, and said, 'Is it true, Uriel, that you are going into our parts, and that you mean to court the girl I loved so well?' 'Yes,' I answered, 'since you ask me, that is my intention. And you have no right to change your mind, or I shall think you were tricking us when you asked for my sister in marriage.' 'I was not,' replied Joseph, 'but I should feel I was deceiving you now if I allowed you to leave without telling you a miserable thing. God is my witness that these words should never have left my lips against a person whose father brought me up, if you were not on the point of taking a false step. But your father has also brought me up, educating my mind just as the other fed and clothed my body, and I am forced to tell you the truth. Uriel, at the time when I left Brulette with my heart full of love, she had already, without my knowledge, loved another man, and today there is a living proof of it which she does not even take the trouble to hide. Now then, do as you please. I shall think no more about her." So saying, Joseph turned his back on me and went into the woods. He looked so wild that I, with my heart full of faith and love, accused him in my thoughts of madness and wicked anger. You remember, sister, that you thought me ill as we drove that day to the village of Uriel. When we got there, you found 2 letters from Brulette, and I found 3 from Tiennet, which our friends there had neglected to send on in spite of their promises. Those letters were so simple, so affectionate, and showed such truth in every word, that I said to myself, I will go, and Joseph's words went out of my mind like a bad dream. I was ashamed for him, and would not remember them. And then, just now, when I saw Brulette with that look of hers, so gentle, so modest, that charmed me so in the old days, I swear to God I had forgotten all as though it had never happened. The sight of the child killed me. And that was why I was resolved to know if Brulette were free to love me. She is, because she has promised to expose herself for my sake to the criticisms and neglect of others. Well, as she is now tied to no one, even if there be a fault in her, whether I believe it a little or not at all, whether she confesses or explains it, it is all one. I love her. Would you love a degraded girl? Cried Thérence. No, no, think of your father, of your sister. Don't go to this wedding. Wait till we know the truth. I don't distrust Brulette, I don't believe in Joseph. I am sure that Brulette is spotless, but she must say so. She must do more, she must prove it. Go and fetch her, Tiennet. Let her explain this thing at once, before my brother takes one of those steps from which an honest man cannot back down. You shall not go, Tiennet, said Uriel. I forbid you. If, as I believe, Brulette is as innocent as my sister Thérence, she shall not be subjected to the insult of that question before I have openly pledged my word to her. Think it over, brother, said Thérence, again urging him. Sister, said Uriel, you forget one thing. If Brulette has done a wrong thing, I have committed a crime. If love betrayed her into bringing a child into the world, anger betrayed me into sending a man out of it. Then, as Thérence still remonstrated, he added, kissing her and pushing her aside, Enough, enough. I need pardon before I judge of others. Did I not kill a man? So saying, he rushed off without waiting for me, and I saw him running towards the bride's house, where the smoke of the chimney and the uproar within bespoke the wedding feast. Ah, said Thérence, following him with her eyes, my poor brother cannot forget his misfortune, and perhaps he will never be comforted. He will be comforted, Thérence, I replied, when he sees how the girl he loves him. I'll answer for her loving him, and in times past too. I think so too, Tiennet, but suppose she were unworthy of him? My beautiful Thérence, are you so stern that you would think it a mortal sin if a misfortune happened to a mere child? And who knows, perhaps ignorantly or by force? It is not the misfortune or the fault I should blame so much as the lies told and acted, and the behaviour that followed. If at the first your cousin had said openly to my brother, Do not court me, for I have been betrayed, I could understand that he might have forgiven all to such an honest confession. But to let him court her and admire her so much without saying a word. Come, Tiennet, tell me, do you really know nothing about it? Can't you at least guess or imagine something to set my mind at ease? I do so love Brulette that I haven't the courage to condemn her. And yet what will my father say if he thinks I might have saved Uriel from such a danger? Thérence, I know nothing and can tell you nothing, except that now, less than ever, do I doubt Brulette. For if you wish me to tell you, the only person whom I could possibly suspect of abusing her, and upon whom public suspicion fell with some slight appearance of reason, I must honestly say it was Joseph, who now seems to me, after what your brother told us, to be as white as the driven snow. Now there is but one other person who, to my knowledge, was, I will not say capable, but in a position to use his friendship for Brulette to lead her wrong. And that is I. Do you believe I did, Thérence? Look me in the eyes before you answer. No one has accused me of it, that I know of, but I might be the sinner all the same, and you don't know me well enough yet to be sure of my honesty and good faith. That is why I say to you, look in my face and see if falsehood and cowardice are at home there. Thérence did as I told her and looked at me, without showing the least embarrassment. Then she said, No, Tiennet, it is not in you to lie like that. If you are satisfied about Brulette, I will be too. Come, my lad, now go off to the dance. I don't want you here any longer. Yes, you do, I said. That child is going to plague you. He is not amiable with persons he does not know, and I would like either to carry him off or help you to take care of him. Not amiable, isn't he? Said Thérence, taking him on her knee. Bah! What difficulty is there in managing a little monkey like that? I never tried, but I don't believe there is much art in it. Come, my young man, what do you want? Don't you want something to eat? No, said Charlot, who was sulky without daring to show it. Well, just as you like. When you want your broth, you can ask for it. I'll give you all you want, and even play with you if you get tired. Say, do you want me to play with you? No, said Charlot, frowning fiercely. Very good, then play alone, said Thérence quietly, setting him on the floor. I am going into the courtyard to see the pretty little black horse. She moved to go. Charlot wept. Thérence pretended not to hear him till he came to her. Dear me, what's the matter? She said, as if surprised. Make haste and tell me, for I am going. I can't wait. I want to see the pretty little black horse, sobbed Charlot. Then come along, but stop crying, for he runs away when he hears children cry. Charlot choked down his sobs and went off to stroke and admire the clarin. Should you like to get on him? Asked Thérence. No, I'm afraid. I'll hold you. No, I'm afraid. Very good, then don't get on. In a minute more he wanted to. No, said Thérence, you'll be afraid. No. Yes, you will. No, no, said Charlot. She put him on the horse and led it along, holding the child very carefully. After watching them a little while, I saw that Charlot's whims could not hold out against so quiet a will as Thérence's. She had discovered the way to manage a troublesome child at her first attempt, though it had taken Brulette a year of patience and weariness. But it really seemed as if the good God had made Thérence a mother without an apprenticeship. She had guessed the astuteness and decision needed, and practised them without worrying herself, or feeling surprised or impatient at anything. Charlot, who had thought himself master of everybody, was much astonished to find that with her he was only master of the power to sulk, and as she did not trouble herself about that, he soon saw it was trouble wasted. At the end of half an hour he became quite pleasant, asking for what he wanted, and making haste to accept whatever was offered to him. Thérence gave him something to eat, and I admired how, out of her own judgment, she knew just what quantity to give him, not too much nor yet too little, and how to keep him occupied beside her while she was occupied in her own affairs, talking with him as if he were a reasonable being, and treating the imp with such confidence that, without seeming to question him, he soon ran over all his little tales, which he usually required much begging to do when others tried to make him. He even took such pleasure in her and was so proud of knowing how to converse that he got impatient at not knowing the words he wanted, and so invented some to express his meaning. And they were not at all silly or meaningless either. "What are you doing here, Tiennet?" she said to me suddenly, as if to let me know she thought I had been there long enough. As I had already invented about 50 little reasons for staying on, her question took me short, and I could think of nothing to say except that I was occupied in looking at her. "Does that amuse you?" she exclaimed. "I don't know," I answered. "You might as well ask the wheat if it likes to grow in the sunshine." "Oh, oh, so you are getting mischievous and turning compliments, are you? But please remember it is lost time with me, for I know nothing about them and can't make any reply." "I don't know anything about them either, Thérence. All that I meant to say was that to my mind there is nothing so beautiful and saintly as a young girl taking pleasure in a child's prattle." "Is not that natural?" said Thérence. "It seems to me that I get to the truth of the things of the good God when I look at that little fellow and talk with him. I feel that I do not live, usually, as a woman ought to like to live. But I did not choose my own lot, and the wandering life I lead is my duty, because I am the support and happiness of my dear father. Therefore I never complain and never wish for a life which would not be his. Only I can understand the happiness of others. For instance, that of Brulette with her Charlot, whether he be her own or just the good God's, would be very sweet to me. I have not often had a chance to enjoy such amusement, so I take it when I find it. Yes, I like the company of this little man, and I had no idea he was so clever and knew so much. And yet, dear, Charlot is only tolerable because Brulette has taken such pains with him. He will have to improve very much before he is as amiable as the children God sends good into the world." "You surprise me," said Thérence. "If there are nicer children than he, it must be very pleasant to live with them. But now that's enough, Tiennet. Go away, or they will send after you, and then they will ask me to go too. And that would, I confess, annoy me, for I am tired, and would much rather stay quietly here with the little one. I had to obey, and I departed with my heart full, and topsy-turvy with ideas that suddenly came into my head about that girl. End of section 23. Section 24 of The Bagpipers by George Sand. Translated by Catherine Prescott Wormley. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. 24th Evening. It was not only Thérence's extreme beauty which filled my thoughts, but a something, I don't know what, which made her seem to be above all others. I was surprised that I had loved Brulette, who was so unlike her, and I kept asking myself if the one were too frank or the other too coy. I thought Brulette the most amiable, for she had always something kind to say to her friends, and she knew how to keep them about her with all sorts of little orders, which flatter young fellows, for they like to fancy themselves of use. On the other hand, Thérence showed you frankly that she did not want you, and even seemed surprised and annoyed if you paid her any attention. Both knew their own value, however, but whereas Brulette took the trouble to make you feel it, the other seemed only to wish for the same sort of regard as that she gave you. I don't know how it was that the spice of pride hidden under all this seemed to me an allurement which brought temptation as well as fear. I found the dance at its height, and Brulette was skimming like a butterfly in Uriel's arms. Such ardour was in their faces, she was so intoxicated within and he without, that it really seemed as if neither could hear or see anything about them. The music carried them away, and I do believe that their feet did not touch the earth, and that their souls were dancing in paradise. Now, among those who lead a reel, there are seldom any who have neither love nor some other wild fancy in their heads, and therefore no attention was paid to this pair, and there was so much wine, noise, dust, music, and lively talk in the heated air of the wedding feast, that night came on before any one took much notice of the actions of others. Brulette merely asked me about Charlot, and why Thérence did not come and dance. My answer satisfied her, and Uriel did not give her time to say much about the boy. I did not feel inclined to dance, for I could not see any pretty girls. I believe there were plenty, but not one that compared with Thérence, and I could not get Thérence out of my head. I stood in a corner to watch her brother, so as to have something to tell her if she questioned me. Uriel had so completely forgotten his troubles that he was all youth and happiness. He was well mated with Brulette, for he loved pleasure and racket as much as she did when he was in it, and he carried the day against the other lads, for he never got tired of dancing. All the world knows, for it is so in all lands, that women can floor the men at a reel, and can keep themselves going while we poor fellows are dying of heat and thirst. Uriel never cared for eating or drinking, and you would really have thought he had sworn to surfeit Brulette with her choice amusement. But I could see beneath the surface that he was doing it for his own pleasure, and that he would gladly have gone round the world on one foot, could he have kept his airy partner in his arms. At last, however, some of the youths, beginning to get annoyed that Brulette refused them, took notice that a stranger had cut them out, and talk began about it around the tables. I must tell you that Brulette, not expecting much amusement, and rather inclined to despise the young men of that neighbourhood on account of their ill-natured speeches, was not dressed with her usual daintiness. She looked more like a little nun than the queen of our parts, and as others had come to the wedding in gala costumes, she did not produce the great effect of former days. Still, she was so animated in dancing that the company were forced to admit that no one compared with her, and as those who did not know her questioned those who did, a great deal of evil as well as good was talked around me. I listened, wishing to make sure of what was being said, and not revealing that she was my relation. I heard the whole story of the monk and the child, and of Joseph and the Bourbonnais. It was also told that Joseph was probably not the father of the child, but more likely that tall fellow, who seemed so sure of his rights that no one else was allowed to approach her. "Well," said one, "if it was he, and he comes to make reparation, better late than never." "Faith," cried another, "she didn't choose badly. He is a splendid fellow, and seems good company." "After all," said a third, "they make a fine couple, and when the priest has had his say, their home will be as good as any." All of which let me know that a woman is never lost if she has good protection. But it must be the honest and lasting protection of one man, not the support of hundreds, for the more who meddle in the matter, the more there are to pull her down. Just then my aunt took Uriel apart, and bringing him close into my neighbourhood, said to him, I want you to drink a glass of wine to my health, for it does my heart good to see your fine dancing, which stirred up the company and made the wedding go off so well." Uriel seemed not to like to leave Brulette even for a moment, but the mistress of the house was very peremptory, and he could not help showing her civility. They sat down at an empty table, with a candle between them, face to face. My aunt Marguiton was, as I told you, a very small woman who had never been a fool. She had the drollest little face you ever saw, very fair and very rosy, though she was in the 50s and had brought 14 children into the world. I have never seen such a long nose as hers, with very small eyes sunk in each side of it, sharp as gimlets, and so bright and mischievous that one couldn't look into them without wishing to laugh and chatter. I saw, however, that Uriel was on his guard and was cautious about the wine she poured out for him. He seemed to feel there was something quizzical and inquisitive about her, and without knowing why, he put himself on the defence. My aunt, who since early morning had not stopped talking and moving about, had a very pretty taste for good wine, and had scarcely drunk a glass or two when the end of her long nose grew as red as a whore, and her broad mouth, with its rows of narrow white teeth, enough to furnish 3 ordinary mouths, began to smile from ear to ear. However, she was not at all upset as to judgment, for no woman could be gay without freedom and mischievous without spite better than she. "Well now, my lad," she said, after some general talk which served only to lead up to her object, "here you are, for good and all, pledged to our Brulette. You can't go back now, for what you wished has happened. Everybody is talking, and if you could hear, as I do, what is being said on all sides, you would find that they have saddled you with the past as well as the future of my pretty niece." I saw that the words drove a knife into Uriel's heart, and knocked him from the stars into the brambles. But he put a good face upon the matter, and answered, laughing, "I might wish, my good lady, to have had her past, for everything about her is beautiful and good. But as I can have her future only, I expect to share it with the good God." "And right you are," returned my aunt, laughing still and looking closely at him with her little green eyes, which were very near-sighted, so that she seemed about to prick his forehead with the sharp end of her nose. "When people love, they should love right through, and not be repelled by anything." "That is my intention," said Uriel in a curt tone, which did not disconcert my aunt. "And that's all the more to your credit," she continued, "because poor Brulette has more virtue than property. You know, I suppose, that you could put her dowry into that glass, and there are no louis d'or to her account." "Well, so much the better," said Uriel. "The reckoning is the sooner made. I don't like to spend my time doing sums." "And besides," said my aunt, "a child already weaned is less trouble in a household, especially if the father does his duty, as I'll warrant he will in this case." Poor Uriel went hot and cold, but thinking it was meant as a test, he stood it well, and answered, "I'll warrant, too, that the father will do his duty, for there will be no other father than I for all the children born or to be born." "Oh, as for that," she returned, "you won't be the master, I give you my word." "I hope I shall," he said, clenching his glass as though he would crush it in his hand. "He who abandons his property has no right to filch it back, and I am too faithful a guardian to allow marauders about." My aunt stretched out her skinny little hand and passed it over Uriel's forehead. She felt the sweat, though he was very pale, and then, suddenly changing her look of elfish mischief to one that expressed the goodness and kindness of her heart, she said, "My lad, put your elbows on the table and bring your face quite close to my mouth. I want to give you a good kiss upon your cheek." Uriel, surprised at her softened manner, obeyed her fancy. She raised his thick hair and saw Brulette's token, which he still wore and which she probably recognized. Then, bringing her big mouth close to his ear as if she meant to bite him, she whispered 3 or 4 words into its orifice, but so low that I couldn't catch a sound. Then she added out loud, pinching his ear, "Here's a faithful ear, but you must admit it is well rewarded." Uriel made but one bound right over the table, knocking over the glasses and candle before I had time to catch them. In a second he was sitting by my little aunt and kissing her as if she had been the mother that bore him. In short, he behaved like a crazy man, shouting and singing and waving his glass, while my aunt, laughing like a jackdaw, cried as she clinked her glass to his, "To the health of the father of your child. All of which proves," she said, turning to me, "that the cleverest folk are often those who are thought the greatest fools, just as the greatest fools are those who have thought themselves so clever. You can say that too, my Tiennet, you with your honest heart and your faithful cousinship. I know that you behaved to Brulette as if you had been her brother. You deserve to be rewarded, and I rely on the good God to see that you get your dues. Some day or other he will give you, too, your perfect contentment." Thereupon she went off, and Uriel, clasping me in his arms, cried out, "Your aunt is right, she is the best of women. You are not in the secret, but that's no matter. You are only the better friend for it. Give me your word, Tiennet, that you will come and work here all summer with us, for I have got an idea about you, and please God to help me, you shall thank me for it, fine and good." "If I understand what you mean," I replied, "you have just been drinking your wine pure, and my aunt has taken the fly out of your cup. But any idea of yours about me seems more difficult to carry out." "Friend Tiennet, happiness can be earned, and if you have no ideas contrary to mine, I'm afraid they are only too like, but ideas won't suffice." "Of course not, but nothing venture, nothing have. Are you such a Berrichon that you dare not tempt fate?" "You set me too good an example to let me be a coward," I answered. "But do you think—" Brulette here came up and interrupted us, and we saw by her manner that she had no suspicion of what had occurred. "Sit here," said Uriel, drawing her to his knee, as we do in our parts without any thought of harm, "and tell me, my dear love, if you have no wish to dance with someone besides me? You gave me your word, and you have kept it. That was all I needed to take a bitterness out of my heart. But if you think people will talk in a way to hurt your feelings, I will submit to your pleasure and not dance with you again till you command me." "Is it because you are tired of my company, Maître Uriel?" replied Brulette, "and that you want me to make acquaintance with the other girls at the wedding?" "Oh, if you take it that way," cried Uriel, beside himself with joy, "so much the better. I don't even know if there are other girls here besides you, and I don't want to know." Then he offered her his glass, begging her to touch it with her lips and then drinking its contents with a full heart, after which he dashed it to pieces, so that no one should use it again, and carried off his betrothed, leaving me to think over the matter he had suggested, about which I felt I'm sure I don't know how. I had not yet felt myself all over about it, and it had never seemed to me that my nature was ardent enough to fall in love lightly, especially with so grave a girl as Thérence. I had escaped all annoyance at not being able to please Brulette, thanks to my lively nature, which was always willing to be diverted. But somehow I could not think of Thérence without a sort of trembling in the marrow of my bones, as if I had been asked to make a sea voyage, I who had never set foot on a river boat. Can it be, thought I, that I have fallen in love today without knowing it? Perhaps I ought to believe it, for here is Uriel urging me on, and his eye must have seen it in my face. Still I am not certain, because I feel half suffocated, and love certainly ought to be a livelier thing than that. Thinking over all this, I reached, I couldn't tell you how, the ruined castle. That old heap of stones was sleeping in the moonlight as mute as those who built it, but a tiny light coming from the room which Thérence occupied on the courtyard showed that the dead were not the only guardians of the building. I went softly to the window, which had neither glass nor woodwork, and looking through the leaves that shaded it, I saw the girl of the woods on her knees saying her prayers beside the bed, where Charlot was sleeping soundly with his eyes tightly closed. I might live 1,000 years and I should never forget her face as it was at that moment. It was that of a saint, as peaceful as those they carve in stone for the churches. I had just seen Brulette, radiant as the summer sun, in the joy of her love and the whirl of the dance, and here was Thérence alone, content, and white as the moonlight of the springtide sky. Afar I heard the wedding music, but that said nothing to the ear of the woodland girl. I think she was listening to the nightingale as it sang its tender canticle in the neighbouring covert. I don't know what took place within me, but all of a sudden I thought of God, a thought that did not often come to me in those days of youth and carelessness. But now it bent my knees, as by some secret order, and filled my eyes with tears which fell like rain, as though a great cloud had burst within my head. Do not ask me what prayer I made to the good angels of the sky. I know it not myself. Certainly I did not dare to ask of God to give me Thérence, but I think I prayed him to make me worthier of so great an honour. When I rose from the ground, I saw that Thérence had finished her prayer and was preparing for the night. She had taken off her cap, and I noticed that her black hair fell in coils to her feet. But before she had taken the first pin from her garments, believe me if you will, I had fled as though I feared to be guilty of sacrilege. And yet I was no fool either, and not at all in the habit of making faces at the devil. But Thérence filled my soul with respect, as though she were cousin of the Holy Virgin. As I left the old castle, a man whom I had not seen in the shadow of the great portal surprised me by saying, "Hey, friend, tell me if this is, as I think it is, the old castle of Chassin." "The head woodsman," I cried, recognizing the voice. And I kissed him with such ardour that he was quite astonished, for naturally he did not remember me as I did him. But when he did recollect me, he was very friendly, and said, "Tell me quick, my boy, if you have seen my children, or if you know whether they are here." "They came this morning," I said, "and so did I and my cousin Brulette. Your daughter Thérence is in there, very quiet and tranquil, and my cousin is close by, at a wedding with your dear good son Uriel." "Thank God I am not too late," said Père Bastien. "Joseph has gone on to Nohant, expecting to find them there together." "Joseph? Did he come with you? They did not expect you for 5 or 6 days, and Uriel told us—" "Just see how matters turn out in this world," said Père Bastien, drawing me out on the road so as not to be overheard. "Of all the things that are blown about by the wind, the brains of lovers are the lightest. Did Uriel tell you all that relates to Joseph?" "Yes, everything." "When Joseph saw Thérence and Uriel starting for these parts, he whispered something in Uriel's ear. Do you know what he told him?" "Yes, I know, Père Bastien, but—" "Hush, for I know too." Seeing that my son changed colour, and that Joseph rushed into the woods in a singular way, I followed him and ordered him to tell me what secret he had just told Uriel. "Master," he replied, "I don't know if I have done well or ill, but I felt myself obliged to do it. This is what it is, for I am also bound to tell you." Thereupon he told me how he had received a letter from friends telling him that Brulette was bringing up a child that could only be her own. After telling me all this with much suffering and anger, he begged me to follow Uriel and prevent him from committing a great folly and swallowing a bitter shame. When I questioned him as to the age of the child, and he had read me the letter he carried with him, as though it were a remedy for his wounded love, I did not feel at all sure that it was not written to plague him, more especially as the Carnat lad, who wrote the letter, in answer to a proposal of Joseph's to be properly admitted as a bagpiper in your parts, seemed to have an ill-natured desire to prevent his return. Besides, remembering the modesty and proper behaviour of that little Brulette, I felt more and more persuaded that injustice was being done her, and I could not help blaming and ridiculing Joseph for so readily believing such a wicked story. Doubtless I should have done better, my good Tiennet, to have left him in the belief that Brulette was unworthy of his love. But I can't help that. A sense of justice guided my tongue, and prevented me from seeing the consequences. I was so displeased to hear an innocent young girl defamed that I spoke as I felt. It had a greater effect upon Joseph than I expected. He went instantly from one extreme to the other. Bursting into tears like a child, he let himself drop on the ground, tearing his clothes and pulling out his hair, with such anger and self-reproach that I had great trouble in pacifying him. Luckily his health has grown nearly as strong as yours, for a year sooner such despair, seizing him in this manner, would have killed him. I spent the rest of the day and all that night in trying to compose his mind. It was not an easy thing for me to do. On the one hand, I knew that my son had fallen in love with Brulette in a very earnest way from the day he first saw her, and that he was only reconciled to life after Joseph had given up a suit which thwarted his hopes. On the other hand, I have always felt a great regard for Joseph, and I know that Brulette has been in his thoughts since childhood. I had to sacrifice one or the other, and I asked myself if I should not do a selfish deed in deciding for the happiness of my own son against that of my pupil. Tiennet, you don't know Joseph, and perhaps you have never known him. My daughter Thérence may have spoken of him rather severely. She does not judge him in the same way that I do. She thinks him selfish, hard, and ungrateful. There is some truth in that, but what excuses him in my eyes cannot excuse him in those of a young girl like Thérence. Women, my lad, only want us to love them. They take into their hearts alone the food they live on. God made them so, and we men are fortunate if we are worthy to understand this. "I think," I remarked to the head woodsman, "that I do now understand it, and that women are very right to want nothing else of us but our hearts, for that is the best thing in us." No doubt, my son," returned the fine old man. "I have always thought so. I loved the mother of my children more than money, more than talent, more than pleasure or livery talk, more indeed than anything in the world. I see that Uriel is tarred with the same brush, for he has changed, without regret, all his habits and tastes so as to fit himself to be worthy of Brulette. I believe that you feel in the same way, for you show it plainly enough. But nevertheless talent is a thing which God likewise values. for he does not bestow it on everybody, and we are bound to respect and help those whom he has thus marked as the sheep of his fold. But don't you think that your son Uriel has as much mind and more talent for music than José? My son Uriel has both mind and talent. He was received into the fraternity of the Bagpipers when he was only 18 years old, and though he has never practised the profession, he has great knowledge and aptitude for it. But there is a wide difference, friend Tiene, between those who acquire and those who originate. There are some with ready fingers and accurate memory who can play agreeably anything they learn, but there are others who are not content with being taught, who go beyond all teaching, seeking ideas, and bestowing on all future musicians the gift of their discoveries. Now I tell you that Joseph is one of them. In him are two very remarkable natures. The nature of the plain, as I may say, where he was born, which gives him his tranquil, calm, and solid ideas, and the nature of our hills and woods, which have enlarged his understanding and brought him tender and vivid and intelligent thoughts. He will one day be, for those who have ears to hear, something more than a mere country minstrel. He will become a true master of the bagpipe, as in the olden time, one of those to whom the great musicians listened with attention, and who changed at times the customs of their art. Do you really think, Père Bastien, that José will become a second head woodsman of your craft? Ah, my poor Tiene, replied the old minstrel, sighing, you don't know what you are talking about, and I should have hard work to make you understand it. Try to do so at any rate, I replied. You are good to listen to, and it isn't good that I should continue the simpleton that I am. End of section 24. Section 25 of the Bagpipers by George Sand. Translated by Catherine Prescott Wormley. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. 25th Evening. You must know, began Père Bastien very readily, for he was fond of talking when he was listened to willingly, that I might have been something if I had given myself wholly up to music. I could have done so had I made myself a fiddler, as I thought of doing in my youth. I don't mean that one improves a talent by fiddling 3 days and nights at a wedding, like that fellow I can hear from here, murdering the tune of our mountain jig. When a man has no object before his mind but money, he gets tired and rusty. But there's a way for an artist to live by his body without killing the soul within him. As every festival brings him in at least 20 or 30 francs, that's enough for him to take his ease, to live frugally, and to travel about for pleasure and instruction. That's what Joseph wants to do, and I have always advised him to do it. But here's what happened to me. I fell in love, and the mother of my dear children would not hear of marrying a fiddler without hearth or home, always a-going, spending his nights in a racket and his days in sleeping, and ending his life with a debauch. For, unhappily, it is seldom that a man can keep himself straight at that business. She kept me tied to the woodsman's craft, and that's the whole story. I never regretted my talent as long as she lived. To me, as I told you, love is the divinest music. When I was left a widower with 2 young children, I gave myself wholly to them. But my music got very rusty and my fingers very stiff by dint of handling axe and shears. And I confess to you, Tiene, that if my 2 children were happily married, I should quit this burdensome business of slinging iron and chopping wood, and I would be off, happy and young again, to live as I liked, seeking converse with angels, until old age brought me back, feeble but satisfied, to my children's hearth. And then, too, I am sick of felling trees. Do you know, Tiene, I love them, those noble old companions of my life, who have told me so many things by the murmur of their leaves and the crackling of their branches. And I, more malignant than the fire from heaven, have thanked them by driving an axe into their hearts and laying them low at my feet like so many dismembered corpses. Don't laugh at me, but I have never seen an old oak fall, nor even a young willow, without trembling with pity or with fear, as an assassin of the works of God. I long to walk beneath their shady branches, repulsed no longer as an ingrate, and listening at last to the secrets I was once unworthy to hear. The head woodsman, whose voice had grown impassioned, stopped short and thought a moment. And so did I, amazed not to think him the madman I should have thought another in his place. Perhaps because he had managed to put his ideas into me, or possibly because I myself had some such ideas in my own head. No doubt you are thinking, he resumed, that we have got a long way from Joseph. But you are mistaken, we are all the nearer. And now you shall understand how it was that I decided, after some hesitation, to treat the poor fellow's troubles sternly. I have often said to myself, and I have seen, in the way his grief affected him, that he could never make a woman happy, and also that he could never be happy himself with any woman unless she could make him the pride of her life. For it must be admitted that Joseph has more need of praise and encouragement than of love and friendship. What made him in love with Brulette in the first instance was that she listened to his music and urged him on. What kept him from loving my daughter, for his return to her was only pique, was that Thérence requires affection more than knowledge, and treated him like a son rather than a man of great talent. I venture to say that I have read the lad's heart, and that his one idea has been to dazzle Brulette some day with his success. So long as Brulette was held to be the queen of beauty and dignity in her own country, he would, thanks to her, enjoy a double royalty. But Brulette, smirched by a fault, or merely degraded by the suspicion of one, was no longer his cherished dream. I, who knew the heart of my son Uriel, I knew he would never condemn Brulette without a hearing, and that if she had not done anything wrong he would love her and protect her all the more because she was misjudged. So that decided me finally to oppose Joseph's love, and to advise him to think no longer of marriage. Indeed, I tried to make him understand that Brulette prefers my son, which is what I believe myself. He seemed to give in to my arguments, but it was only, I think, to get rid of them. For yesterday morning, before it was light, I saw him making his preparations for departure. Though he thought himself cleverer than I, and expected to get off without being seen, I kept with him until, losing patience, he let out the whole truth. I saw then that his anger was great, and that he meant to follow Uriel and quarrel with him about Brulette, if he found that Brulette was worth it. As he was still uncertain on the latter point, I thought best to blame him and even to ridicule a love like his, which was only jealousy without respect, gluttony, as one might say, without appetite. He confessed I was right, but he went off all the same, and by that you can judge of his obstinacy. Just as he was about to be received into the guild of his art, for an appointment was made for the competition near Ausens, he abandoned everything, though certain to lose the opportunity, saying he could get himself admitted willingly or unwillingly in his own country. Finding him so determined that he even came near getting angry with me, I decided to come with him, fearing some bad action on his part and some fresh misfortune for Uriel. We parted only a couple of miles from here at the village of Sarzay, where he took the road to Nohant, while I came on here, hoping to find Uriel and reason with him, thinking that if necessary, my legs could still take me to Nohant tonight. "Luckily you can rest them tonight," I said. "Tomorrow will be time enough to discuss matters. But are you really anxious for what may happen if the two gallants meet? Joseph was never quarrelsome, to my knowledge. In fact, I have always seen him hold his tongue when people showed him their teeth." "Yes, yes," answered Père Bastien, "but that was in the days when he was a sickly child and doubted his strength. There is no more dangerous water than still water. It is not always healthy to stir the depths. Don't you want to come into your new abode and see your daughter?" "No, you said she was resting. I am not anxious about her. I am much more desirous to know the truth about Brulette. For though my heart defends her, still my reason tells me that there may have been some little thing in her conduct which lays her open to blame. And I feel I ought to know more before going too far." I was about to tell him what had happened an hour before, under my very eyes, between Uriel and my aunt, when Uriel himself appeared, sent by Brulette, who was afraid Thérence might be unable to get Charlot to sleep. Father and son had an explanation, in which Uriel, begging his father not to ask for a secret he was bound not to tell, and which Brulette herself was not aware that he knew, swore on his baptism that Brulette was worthy of his father's blessing. "Come and see her, dear father," he added. "You can do it very easily because we are now dancing out of doors, and you need no invitation to be present. By the very way she kisses you, you will know that no girl so sweet and amiable was ever more pure in heart." "I do not doubt it, my son, and I will go to please you, and also for the pleasure of seeing her. But wait a moment, for I want to speak to you of Joseph." I thought I had better leave them alone, so I went off to tell my aunt of Père Bastien's arrival, knowing she would welcome him heartily and not let him stay outside. But I found no one in the house but Brulette. The whole wedding party, with the music at their head, had gone to carry the roast to the newly married couple, who had retired to a neighbouring house, for it was past 11 o'clock at night. It is an ancient custom, which I have never thought very nice, to shame a young bride by a visit and joking songs. Though the other girls had all gone, with or without malicious intention, Brulette had had the decency to stay in the chimney-corner, where I found her sitting, as if keeping watch in the kitchen, but really taking the sleep she so much needed. I did not care to disturb her, nor to deprive her of the fine surprise she would feel on waking at the sight of the head woodsman. Very tired myself, I sat down at a table, laid my arms on it and my head on my arms, as you do when you mean to take a 5 minutes nap. But I thought of Terence and did not sleep. For a moment only my thoughts were hazy, and just then a trifling noise made me open my eyes without lifting my head, and I saw a man enter and walk up to the chimney. Though the candles had all been carried off for the visit to the bride, the fire of fagots which flamed on the hearth gave light enough to enable me to recognize at once who it was. It was Joseph, who no doubt had met some of the wedding guests on his way to Nohant, and finding where we were, had retraced his steps. He was dusty with his journey and carried a bundle on the end of his stick, which he threw into a corner and then stood stock still like a milestone, looking at Brulette asleep and taking no notice of me. The year during which I had not seen him had made as great a change in him as it had in Terence. His health being better than it ever was, it was safe to call him a handsome man, whose square shoulders and wiry figure were more muscular than thin. His face was sallow, partly from a bilious constitution and partly from the heat of the sun, and this swarthy tint went singularly well with his large light eyes and his long straight hair. It was still the same sad and dreamy face, but something bold and decided, showing the harsh will so long concealed, was mingled in it. I did not move, wishing to observe the manner in which he approached Brulette and so judge of his coming meeting with Uriel. No doubt he did study the girl's face, seeking for truth, and perhaps beneath the eyelids, closed in quiet slumber, he perceived her peace of heart. For the girl was sweetly pretty seen at that moment in the blaze from the hearth. Her complexion was still bright with pleasure, her mouth smiled with contentment, and the silken lashes of her closed eyes cast a soft shadow on her cheeks, which seemed to quiver beneath them like the sly glances that girls cast on their lovers. But Brulette was sound asleep, dreaming no doubt of Uriel, and thinking as little of alluring Joseph as of repelling him. I saw that he felt her beauty so much that his wrath hung by a thread, for he leaned over her and, with a courage I did not give him credit for, he put his lips quite close to hers and would have touched them if I, in a sudden rage, had not coughed violently and stopped the kiss on its way. Brulette woke up with a start. I pretended to do the same, and Joseph felt a good deal of a fool between the pair of us, who both asked what he was doing, without any appearance of confusion on Brulette's part or of malice on mine. End of section 25. Section 26 of the Bagpipers by George Sand, translated by Catherine Prescott Wormley. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. 26th Evening. Joseph recovered himself quickly, and showing plainly that he did not mean to be put in the wrong, he said to Brulette, "I am glad to find you here. After a year's absence, don't you mean to kiss an old friend?" He approached her again, but she drew back, surprised at his singular manner, and said, "No, José, it is not my way to kiss any lad, no matter how old a friend he is or how glad I am to see him." "You have grown very coy," he said in an angry and scoffing tone. "I don't think I have ever been coy with you, Joseph. You never gave me any reason to be, and as you never asked me to be familiar, I never had occasion to forbid your kissing me. Nothing is changed between us, and I do not know why you should now lay claim to what has never entered into our friendship." "What an amount of talk and wry faces, all about a kiss," said Joseph, his anger rising. "If I never asked for what you were ready enough to give others, it was because I was a young fool. I thought you would receive me better now that I am neither a ninny nor a coward." "What is the matter with him?" asked Brulette, surprised and even frightened, and coming close up to me. "Is it really he, or someone who looks like him? I thought I saw our José, but this is not his speech, nor his face, nor his friendship." "How have I changed, Brulette?" began José, a little disconcerted and already repentant. "Is it that I now have the courage I once lacked to tell you that you are to me the loveliest in the world, and that I have always longed for your good graces? There's no offence in that, I hope, and perhaps I am not more unworthy of them than others whom you allow to hang around you." So saying, with a return of his vexation, he looked me in the face, and I saw he was trying to pick a quarrel with whoever would take him up. I asked nothing better than to draw his first fire. "Joseph," I said, "Brulette is right in thinking you changed. There is nothing surprising in that. We know how we part, but not how we meet again. You need not be surprised either if you find a little change in me. I have always been quiet and patient, standing by you in all your difficulties and consoling your vexations. But if you have grown more unjust than you used to be, I have grown more touchy, and I take it ill that you should say to my cousin before me that she is prodigal of her kisses and allows too many young men about her." Joseph eyed me contemptuously, and put on a really devilish look of malice as he laughed in my face. Then he said, crossing his arms and looking at me as though he were taking my measure, "Well, is it possible, Tiennet? Can this be you? However, I always did doubt you, and the friendship you professed, to deceive me." "What do you mean by that, José?" said Brulette, much affronted and fancying he had lost his mind. "Where did you get the right to blame me, and why are you trying to see something wrong or ridiculous between my cousin and me? Are you ill or drunken, that you forget the respect you owe me and the affection that you know I deserve?" Joseph drew in his horns, and taking Brulette's hand in his, he said to her with his eyes full of tears, "I am to blame, Brulette. Yes, I am irritable from fatigue and the desire to get here. But I feel nothing but devotion for you, and you ought not to take it in bad part. I know very well that your manners are dignified and that you exact the respect of everybody. It is due to your beauty, which I see is greater, not less than ever. But you surely will allow that you love pleasure, and that people often kiss each other when dancing. It is the custom, and I shall think it a very good one when I profit by it, which will be now, for I have learned how to dance like others, and for the first time in my life I am going to dance with you. I hear the bagpipes returning. Come, you shall see that all my ill humour will clear off under the happiness of being your sweetheart." "José," replied Brulette, not more than half pleased at this speech, "you are very much mistaken if you think I still have sweethearts. I may have been coquettish, that's my way, and I am not bound to give account of my actions. But I have also the right and the will to change my ways. I no longer dance with everybody, and tonight I shall not dance again." "I should have thought," said Joseph, piqued, "that I was not everybody, as you say, to an old friend with whom I made my first communion, and under whose roof I lived." The music and the wedding guests returning with a great racket cut short their words, and Uriel, also entering, full of eagerness and taking no notice of Joseph, caught Brulette on his arm and carried her like a feather to his father, who was waiting outside, and who kissed her joyously, to the great annoyance of Joseph, who clenched his fists as he watched her paying the old man the filial attentions of a daughter. Creeping up to the head woodsman, I whispered that Joseph was there, in a bad temper, and I proposed that he should draw Uriel aside, while I persuaded Brulette to go to bed. Joseph, who was not invited to the wedding, would thus be obliged to go off and sleep at Nohant or at some other house in Chassin. The head woodsman thought the suggestion good, and pretending not to see Joseph, who kept in the background, he talked apart with Uriel, while Brulette went away to see in what part of the house she could stow herself for the night. But my aunt, who had counted on lodging us, did not expect that Brulette would take it into her head to go to bed before 3 or 4 in the morning. The young men never go to bed at all on the first night of a wedding, and do their best to keep up the dance for 3 days and 3 nights running. If one of them gets tired, he goes into the hayloft and takes a nap. As to the girls and women, they all retire into one room, but generally it is only the old women and the ugly ones who abandon the dance. So, when Brulette went up to the room where she expected to find a place next to some of her relatives, she came upon a crowd of snorers, among whom not a corner as big as the palm of her hand was vacant. And the few who woke up told her to come again towards morning, when they would be ready to go down and serve the tables. She came back to us and told her difficulty. "Well then," said Père Bastien, "you must go and sleep with Thérence. My son and I will spend the night here, so that no talk can be made about it." I declared that in order to avoid giving a pretext for Joseph's jealousy, Brulette could easily slip out with me without saying a word, and Père Bastien going up to him and plying him with questions, I took my cousin to the old castle by a back way through my aunt's garden. When I returned, I found the head woodsman, Joseph, and Uriel at table together. They called me, and I sat down to supper with them, eating, drinking, talking, and singing, to avoid an explosion of anger, which might follow on any talk about Brulette. Joseph, seeing us determined to keep the peace, controlled himself at first, and even seemed gay. But he could not help biting as he caressed, and every joke he made had a sting at the end of it. The head woodsman tried to keep down his bile with a measure of wine, and I think Joseph might willingly have yielded in order to forget himself, if it were not that wine never affected him. He drank 4 times as much as the rest of us, who had no reason to wish to drown our intelligence, and yet his ideas were all the clearer, and his speech too. At last, after some particularly spiteful remarks on the slyness of women and the treachery of friends, Uriel, striking his fist on the table and grasping his father's elbow, which for some time past had been nudging him to keep quiet, said in a decided tone, "No, father, excuse me, but I cannot stand any more of this, and it is much better to say so openly. I know very well that Joseph's teeth will be as sharp a year hence as they are now, and though I have closed my ears to his sayings up to this time, it is right that they should open now to his unjust remarks and reproaches. Come, Joseph, for the last hour I have seen what you mean. You have wasted a great deal of wit. Talk plain, I'm listening. Say what you have on your mind, with the whys and wherefores. I will answer you frankly." "Well, so be it. Come to an explanation," said the head woodsman, reversing his glass and deciding the situation, as he well knew how to do when it became necessary. "We will have no more drinking if it is not to be in friendship, for it is ill mixing the devil's venom with the good God's wine." "You surprise me, both of you," said Joseph, who had grown yellow to the whites of his eyes, though he still continued to laugh vindictively. "What the devil are you angry about, and why do you scratch yourselves when nothing is biting you? I have nothing against anybody. Only I happen to be in the humour to jeer at everything, and I don't think you are likely to rid me of it." "Perhaps I could," said Uriel, provoked. "Try," said Joseph, sneering. "That's enough," said the head woodsman, striking the table with his heavy hand. "Hold your tongues, both of you, and as there is no frankness in you, Joseph, I shall have enough for the two. You misjudged in your heart the woman you wished to love. That is a wrong that God can pardon, for it is not always easy for a man to be trustful or distrustful in his friendships. But it is unfortunately a wrong that cannot be repaired. You fell into that blunder. You must accept the consequences and submit to them." "Why so, master?" said Joseph, setting up his back like an angry cat. "Who will tell the wrong to Brulette? She has not known or suffered from it." "No one," said Uriel. "I am not a blackguard." "Then who will tell it?" demanded Joseph. "Yourself," said Père Bastien. "What can make me?" "The consciousness of your love for her. Doubt never comes singly. You may get over the first twinge, but there comes a second, which will issue from your lips at the first words you say to her." "In fact, I think it has happened already, Joseph," said I, "for this very evening you offended the person we are speaking of." "Perhaps I did," he said haughtily, "but that is between her and me. If I choose that she shall return to me, what makes you think she will not return? I remember my master's song. The music is beautiful and the words are true. Gifts are for those who pray. Well, Uriel, go ahead. Ask in words and I will ask in music, and we will see whether or no I can't win her back again. Come, play fair, you who blame what you call my crooked ways. The game is between us, and we'll have no shuffling. A fine house has more than one door, and we'll each knock at the one that suits us." "I am willing," said Uriel, "but you will please to remember one thing. I will stand no more fault-finding, whether in jest or earnest. If I overlook the past, my good nature does not go so far as to allow any more of it." "What do you mean by that?" demanded Joseph, whose bile interfered with his memory. "I forbid you to ask," said the head woodsman, "and I command you to bethink yourself. If you fight my son, you will be none the more innocent for that, and it will not add to your credit if I withdraw the forgiveness which, without a word of explanation, my heart has already granted you." "Master," cried Joseph, hot with excitement, "if you think you have anything to forgive, I thank you for your forgiveness. But in my opinion I have done you no wrong. I never dreamed of deceiving you, and if your daughter had said yes, I should not have backed down from my offer. She is a girl without an equal for sense and uprightness. I should have loved her, ill or well, but at any rate sincerely and without betraying her. She might perhaps have saved me from much evil and much suffering, but she did not think me worthy of her. Therefore I am at liberty to court whom I will, and I consider that the man I trusted and who promised me his help has made haste to take advantage of my momentary pique to supplant me." "Your momentary pique lasted a month, Joseph," said Uriel. "Be fair about it. 1 month, during which you asked my sister in marriage 3 times. I am forced to believe that you held her in derision. If you wish to clear yourself of that insult, you must admit that I was not to blame in the matter. I believed your word. That is the only wrong I have done. Don't give me reason to think it is one I must repent of." Joseph kept silence. Then, rising, he said, "Yes, you are good at argument. You are both cleverer than I at that. I have spoken and acted like a man who does not know what he wants. But you are greater fools than I if you don't know that, without being mad, we may wish for two opposite things. Leave me to be what I am, and I will leave you to be what you wish to be. If your heart is honest, Uriel, I shall soon know it, and if you win the game fairly, I will do you justice and withdraw without resentment. How can you tell if my heart is honest when you have been unable to judge it rightly hitherto? I can tell by what you now say of me to Brulette, replied Joseph. You are in a position to prejudice her against me, and I cannot do the same by you. Stop, I said to Joseph. Don't blame anyone unjustly. Thérence has already told Brulette that you asked her in marriage not a fortnight ago. But nothing further has been or will be told, added Uriel. Joseph, we are better than you think us. We do not want to deprive you of Brulette's friendship. The words touched Joseph, and he put out his hand as if to take Uriel's, but the good intention stopped halfway, and he went off without another word to anyone. A hard heart, cried Uriel, who was too kind himself not to suffer from this ingratitude. No, an unhappy one, said his father. Struck by the words, I followed Joseph to either scold him or console him, for he looked as if death were in his eyes. I was quite as much displeased with him as Uriel was, but the old habit of pitying and protecting him was so strong that it carried me after him whether I would or no. He walked so rapidly along the road to Nohant that I soon lost sight of him, but he stopped at the edge of the Lajon, a little pond on a barren heath. The place is very dreary and without shade, except for that of a few stunted trees ill-fed in the poor soil. But the swampy land around the pond abounded with wildflowers, and as the white water-lily and other marsh plants were now in bloom, the place smelt as sweet as a garden. Joseph had flung himself down among the reeds, and not knowing that he was followed, but believing himself all alone, he was groaning and growling at the same time like a wounded wolf. I called him, merely to let him know I was there, for I knew he would not answer me, and I went straight up to him. This is not the right thing at all, I said to him. You ought to take counsel with yourself. Tears are not reasons. I am not weeping, Tiennet, he answered in a steady voice. I am neither so weak nor so happy that I can find comfort that way. It is seldom in my worst moments that a tear gets out of my eyes, and it is fire, not water, that is forcing its way now, for it burns like live coal. But don't ask me why. I can't tell why, and I don't want to seek for the cause of it. The day of trusting in others is over with me. I know my strength, and I no longer need their help. It was only given out of pity, and I want no more of it. I can rely in future on myself. Thank you for your good intentions. Thank you, and please leave me. But where are you going to spend the night? I am going to my mother's. It is very late, and it is so far from here to Saint-Chartier. No matter, he said, rising. I can't stay here. We shall meet tomorrow, Tiennet. Yes, at home. We go back tomorrow. I don't care where, he said. Wherever she is, your Brulette, I shall find her, and perhaps it will be seen that she has not made her final choice. He went off with a determined air, and seeing that his pride supported him, I offered no further consolation. Fatigue and the pleasure of seeing his mother, and a day or two for reflection might, I hoped, bring him to reason. I planned, therefore, to advise Brulette to stay at Chassin over the next day, and making my way back to the village with this idea in my head, I came upon the head woodsman and his son, in a corner of the field through which I was making a short-cut. They were preparing what they called their bedclothes, in other words, making ready to sleep on the ground, not wishing to disturb the two girls in the castle, and really preferring to lie under the stars at this sweet season of the year. I liked the idea too, for the fresh grass seemed much nicer than the hay of a barn heated by the bodies of a score of other fellows. So I stretched myself beside Uriel, looked at the little white clouds in the clear sky, smelt the hawthorn odours, and fell asleep, thinking of Thérence in the sweetest slumber I ever had in my life. I have always been a good sleeper, and in my youth I seldom wakened of myself. My two companions, who had walked a long distance the day before, let the sun rise without their knowing it, and woke up laughing to find him ahead of them, which didn't happen very often. They laughed still more to see how cautious I was not to tumble out of bed when I opened my eyes and looked about to see where I was. "Come, up, my boy," said Uriel. "We are late enough already. Do you know something? It is the last day of May, and it is the fashion in our parts to tie a nosegay to our sweetheart's door when there was no chance to do it on the 1st of the month. There is no fear that anyone has got ahead of us, because, for one thing, no one knows where my sister and your cousin are lodging, and for another, it isn't the custom in this part of the country to leave, as we say, the call-again bunch. But we are so late, I fear the girls are up, and if they leave their rooms before the May bunch is hung to the door, They will cry out upon us for laziness. As cousin, I answer, laughing, I permit you to hang your bunch, and as brother I ask your permission to hang mine. But perhaps the father won't hear of it with your ears. Yes, he will, said Père Bastien. Uriel said something to me about it. There's no difficulty in trying. Succeeding is another thing. If you know how to manage it, so much the better, my lad. It is your affair. Encouraged by his friendliness, I rushed into the adjoining copse with a light heart, and cut off the whole branch of a wild cherry tree in full bloom, while Uriel, who had already provided himself with one of those beautiful silk and gold ribbons which the women of his country wear beneath their lace coifs, gathered a bunch of white hawthorn and a bunch of pink and tied them in a nosegay that was worthy of a queen. We made but 3 strides from the field to the castle, where the silence assured us that the beauties still slept, no doubt from having talked half the night. But imagine our amazement, when on entering the courtyard our eyes lighted on a superb nosegay, decked with silver and white ribbons, hanging to the door we intended to garland. "The devil!" cried Uriel, preparing to tear away the offending bunch, and looking askance at his dog, whom he had stationed in the courtyard. "Is this the way you guard the house, Master Satan? Have you made acquaintances already? Why didn't you bite the legs of this May-day prowler?" "Stop," said the head woodsman, preventing his son from taking down the nosegay. "There is but one person in these parts whom Satan knows, and who also knows our custom of the call-again bunch, for he has seen it practised among us. Now you pledged your word to that person not to interfere with him. You must be satisfied to make yourself acceptable and not undermine him. Respect his offering, just as he no doubt would have respected yours." "Yes, father," replied Uriel, "if I were sure it was he. But it may be someone else, and the bunch may be intended for Thérence." I remarked that no one knew Thérence who had ever seen her, and looking closer at the flowers, I saw that a mass of white pond lilies had been freshly gathered and tied in bunches, and I remembered that these plants were not common in the neighbourhood, and grew only in the Lajon, on the banks of which I had found Joseph lying. No doubt, instead of going to Saint-Chartier, he had returned upon his steps, and he must even have waded into the water on the shifting sand of the pond, which is dangerous, before he could gather such an armful. "Well, the battle has begun," said Uriel, sighing, as he fastened his May bunch to the door with an anxious look that seemed to me very modest, for he might well have felt sure of success and feared no one. I wished I could feel as certain of his sister, and I hung up my cherry bough with a beating heart, as if she were just behind the door all ready to fling it in my face. And pale I was when the door opened, but it was Brulette who came first, and gave a kiss for good morning to Père Bastien, a handshake to me, and a rosy blush of pleasure to Uriel, though she did not venture to speak to him. "Oh, father," cried Thérence, following her and clasping the head woodsman in her arms, "have you been playing the young man all night? Come in, and let me give you some breakfast. But first let me look at those nosegays. 3, Brulette. Oh, what a girl you are! Is the procession to last all day?" "Only 2 for Brulette," said Uriel. "The 3rd is for you, sister." And he gave her my cherry bough, so full of bloom that it had rained a white shower all round the door. "For me," said Thérence, surprised. "Then you did it, brother, to prevent my being jealous of Brulette." "Brothers are not so gallant," said Père Bastien. "Have you no suspicion of a timid and discreet lover who keeps his mouth shut instead of declaring himself?" Thérence looked all round her as if she were trying to see someone beside me, and when at last her black eyes rested on my discomfited and idiotic face, I thought she was going to laugh, which would have stabbed me to the heart. But she did nothing of the kind, and even blushed a little. Then, holding out her hand, she said, "Thank you, Tiennet. You have shown that you remember me, and I accept the gift without giving it other meaning than belongs to a nosegay." "Well," said Père Bastien, "if you accept it, my daughter, you must follow the usual custom, and fasten a spray of it to your coif." "No," said Thérence, "that might displease some of the girls hereabouts, and I don't want my good Tiennet to repent of having done me a kindness." "Oh, that won't displease anybody," I cried. "If it does not annoy you, it would hugely please me." "So be it," she said, breaking off a little twig of my flowers, which she fastened with a pin to her head. "We are here in the Chassin, Tiennet. If we were in your part of the country, I should be more careful, for fear of getting you into trouble with some compatriot." "You can get me into trouble with all of them, Thérence," I said. "I ask nothing better." "As for that," she replied, "you go too fast. I don't know you well enough, Tiennet, to say if it would be well for either of us." Then, changing the subject with that forgetfulness of herself which came so naturally to her, she said to Brulette, "It is your turn, darling. What return are you going to make for your 2 May bunches? Which of them is to deck your cap?" "Neither, till I know where they came from," replied my prudent cousin. "Tell me, Uriel, and keep me from making a mistake." "I can't tell you," said Uriel, "except that this is mine." "Then I shall carry it whole," she said, taking it down. "And as to that bunch of water-flowers, they must feel very much out of place on a door. I think they will be happier in the moat." So saying, she adorned her cap and the front of her dress with Uriel's flowers, and took the rest into her room. Then, returning, she was about to throw the lilies into the old moat which separated the courtyard from the park, when Uriel, unwilling that such an insult should be offered to his rival, stopped her hand. At this moment the sound of a bagpipe came from the shrubbery which closed the little court in front of us, and someone, who had been near enough to hear every word that had passed, played Père Bastien's air of the 3 Woodsmen. He played it first as we knew it, next a little differently, in a softer and sadder way, then changing it throughout, varying the keys, adding music of his own which was not less beautiful, and even seemed to sigh and to entreat in so tender a manner that we who heard it could hardly help being touched with compassion. At last the player took a stronger and louder tone, as though it were a song of reproach and authority, and Brulette, who had gone to the edge of the moat intending to ding away the lilies, drew back as if terrified by the anger which was expressed in the sounds. Then Joseph, shoving aside the bushes with his feet and shoulders, appeared on the other side of the moat, still piping, his eyes blazing, and seeming, both by his looks and by his music, to threaten Brulette with some great disaster if she did not desist from the insults she was about to offer him. End of section 26. Section 27 of The Bagpipers by Georges Sand, translated by Catherine Prescott Wormley. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. 27th Evening. "Noble music and a fine player," cried Père Bastien, clapping his hands when the sounds ceased. "That is both good and beautiful, Joseph. It is easy to console yourself for everything when you have the ball at your feet in that way. Come over here and let us compliment you." "Nothing consoles for an insult, master," replied Joseph, "and for the rest of my days there will be a ditch full of thorns between Brulette and me if she throws my offering into that moat." "Heaven forbid," cried Brulette, "that I should make such an ill return for the beautiful nosegay. Come over here, José. There need be no thorns between us but those you plant yourself." Joseph sprang into the courtyard, bursting like a wild boar through the line of thick-set brambles which divided him from the moat, and darting across the green slime which filled the bottom of it. Then, snatching the flowers from Brulette's hand, he pulled out several, which he tried to fasten on her head, beside Uriel's pink and white hawthorn blossoms. He did it with an air of authority, as though he had a right to exercise his will. But Brulette stopped him, saying, "One moment, Joseph, I have an idea of my own, and you must submit to it. You will soon be received into the Bagpipers' Guild. Now God has given me a sense of music, enough to let me understand something of it without ever having learned. I have a fancy to have a competition here, and to reward the one who plays best. Give your bagpipe to Uriel, and let him make his trial just as you have now made yours." "Yes, yes, I agree to that entirely," cried Joseph, whose face shone with defiance. "It is your turn, Uriel. Make the buckskin warble like the throat of a nightingale, if you can." "That was not in our agreement, Joseph," answered Uriel. "You agreed that I should speak, and I have spoken. I agree to leave music, in which you excel me, to you. Take back your bagpipe, and speak again in your own language. No one here will weary of hearing you." "As you own yourself vanquished," returned Joseph, "I shall play no more unless Brulette requests it." "Play," she said, and while he played in a marvellous way, she wove a garland of white lilies and tied it with the silver ribbon that bound the bunch. When the music ended, she went up to Joseph and twisted the wreath about the pipe of his instrument, saying, "José, noblest piper, I receive thee into the guild, and give thee the prize. May this wreath bring thee happiness and glory, and prove to thee the high esteem in which I hold thy great talents." "Yes, that's all very well," said Joseph. "Thank you, my Brulette. Now complete my happiness and make me prouder still by wearing one of the flowers you give me. Select the finest and put it next to your heart, if you will not wear it on your head." Brulette smiled and blushed, beautiful as an angel. Then she looked at Uriel, who turned pale, thinking it was all over with him. Joseph, she answered, I have granted you the first of all triumphs, that of music. You must be satisfied, and cease to ask for that of love, which is not won by strength or knowledge, but by the will of the good God. Uriel's face lighted, Joseph's darkened. Brulette, he cried, God's will must be as my will. Gently, she said, he alone is master, and here is one of his little angels, who must not hear words against our holy religion. As she spoke, she took Charlot, who came bounding after her like a lamb to its mother, into her arms. Thérence, who returned to her room while Joseph was playing, had just taken him up, and the child, without letting himself be dressed, had run out half-naked to kiss his darling, as he called Brulette, with a jealous and masterful air which contrasted amusingly with that of the lovers. Joseph, who had forgotten his suspicions, concluding he was duped by young Carnat's letter, drew back on seeing Charlot as though the child were a snake. And as he watched him kissing Brulette eagerly and calling her mamma and Charlot's darling, a mist came over his eyes and he well nigh swooned away. But almost immediately he sprang in a burst of anger toward the child, and clutching him brutally, cried out in a choking voice, Here's the truth at last. This is the trick that has been played upon me, and the mastery of love that has defeated me. Brulette, frightened by Joseph's violence and Charlot's cries, tried to rescue the child. But Joseph, quite beside himself, pulled him away, laughing savagely and saying he wanted to look at him with all his eyes and see the resemblance. So doing, he nearly choked the child, without meaning it, to Brulette's horror, and she, not daring to add to the boy's danger by attempting to rescue him, turned back to Uriel, crying, my child, he is killing my poor child." Uriel made but one stride. Catching Joseph by the nape of the neck, he held him so tightly and firmly that his arms relaxed, and I caught Charlot from him and gave the half-unconscious child back to Brulette. Joseph nearly fainted too, as much from the violence of his anger as from the way in which Uriel had handled him. A fight would certainly have followed, and the head woodsman had already flung himself between them, if Joseph had understood what was happening. But he was unable to consider anything except that Brulette was a mother, and that both she and we had deceived him. "You no longer hide it," he said to her in a choking voice. "What are you saying to me?" asked Brulette, who was sitting on the grass, all in tears, and trying to ease the bruises on Charlot's arms. "You are a wicked madman, I know that. Don't come near me, and never harm this child again, or God will curse you." "One word, Brulette," said Joseph. "If you are his mother, confess it. I will pity and forgive you. In fact, I will even defend you if necessary. But if you can only deny it by a lie, I shall despise you and forget you." "His mother? I his mother?" cried Brulette, springing up as if to cast off Charlot. "You think I am his mother," she said again, taking back the poor child, the cause of all the trouble, and pressing him to her heart. Then she looked about her with a bewildered air, and her eyes sought Uriel. "Can it be possible," she cried, "that any one could think such a thing of me?" "The proof that no one thinks it," cried Uriel, going up to her and kissing Charlot, "is that we love the child whom you love." "Say something better than that, brother," cried Thérence eagerly. "Say what you said to me yesterday. Whether the child is hers or not, he shall be mine, if she will be mine." Brulette flung both arms round Uriel's neck and hung there like a vine to an oak. "Be my master, then," she said. "I never had, and I never will have, another than you." Joseph watched this sudden understanding, of which he was the cause, with an anguish and regret that were terrible to see. The cry of truth in Brulette's words had convinced him, and he fancied he had dreamed the wrong he had just done her. He felt that all was over between them, and without a word he picked up his bagpipe and fled away. Père Bastien ran after him and brought him back, saying, "No, no, that is not the way to part after a lifelong friendship. Bring down your pride, Joseph, and ask pardon of this honest girl. She is my daughter, their word is now pledged, and I am glad of it. But she must remain your sister. A woman forgives a brother for what she could never pardon in a lover." "She may pardon me if she can and if she will," said Joseph, "but if I am guilty, I can receive no absolution but my own. Hate me, Brulette, that may be best for me. I see I have done the one thing that was needed to lose your regard. I can never get it back, but if you pity me, don't tell me so. I ask nothing further of you." "All this would not have happened," said Brulette, "if you had done your duty, which was to go and see your mother. Go now, Joseph, but above all, don't tell her what you have accused me of. She would die of grief." "My dear daughter," said the head woodsman, still detaining Joseph, "I think we do better not to scold children until their minds are quiet. Otherwise they take things crookedly and do not profit by rebuke. To my thinking, Joseph has times of aberration, and if he does not make honourable amends as readily as others do, it is perhaps because he feels his wrongdoing and suffers more from his own self-blame than from the blame of others. Set him an example of good sense and kindness. It is not difficult to forgive when we are happy, and you ought to be content to be loved as you are here. More love you could not have, for I now know things of you that make me hold you in such esteem that here are a pair of hands that will wring the neck of whoever insults you deliberately." But that was not the nature of Joseph's insult, which came from excitement, not reflection, and shame followed so quickly that his heart is now making you full reparation. "Come, Joseph, add your word to mine. I ask no more than that of you, and Brulette too will be satisfied, will you not, my daughter?" "You don't know him, father, if you think he will say that word," replied Brulette, "but I won't exact it, because I want, above all things, to satisfy you. And so, Joseph, I forgive you, though you don't care much about that. Stay and breakfast with us, and talk about something else. What has happened is forgotten." Joseph said not a word, but he took off his hat and laid down his stick as if meaning to stay. The two girls re-entered the house to prepare the meal, and Uriel, who took great care of his horse, began to groom and currycomb him. I looked after Charlot, whom Brulette handed over to my keeping, and the head woodsman, wishing to divert Joseph's mind, talked music and praised the variations he had given to his song. "Never speak to me of that song again," said Joseph. "It can only remind me of painful things, and I wish to forget it." "Well then," said Père Bastien, "play me something of your own composition here and now, just as the thought comes to you." Joseph led the way into the park, and we heard him in the distance playing such sad and plaintive airs that his soul seemed really prostrate with contrition and repentance. "Do you hear him?" I said to Brulette. "That is certainly his way of confessing, and if sorrow is a reparation, he gives you of his best." "I don't think there is a very tender heart beneath that rough pride of his," replied Brulette. "I feel just now like Terence. A little tenderness is more attractive to me than much talent. But I forgive him, and if my pity is not as great as Joseph wants to make it by his music, it is because I know he has a consolation of which my indifference cannot deprive him. I mean the admiration which he and others feel for his talents. If Joseph did not care for that more than for love or friendship, his tongue would not now be dumb and his eye dry to the reproof of friendship. He is quite capable of asking for what he wants." "Well," said the head woodsman, returning alone from the park, "did you hear him, my children? He said all he could and would say, and satisfied to have drawn tears from my old eyes, he has gone away tranquillized." "But you could not keep him to breakfast," said Thérence, smiling. "No," answered her father. "He played too well not to be 3 parts comforted, and he prefers to go away in that mood rather than after some folly he might be led into saying or doing at table." End of section 27. Section 28 of the Bagpipers by Georges Sand. Translated by Catherine Prescott Wormley. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. 28th Evening. We ate our meal in peace, feeling relieved of the apprehensions of the night before as to the quarrel between Joseph and Uriel. And as Thérence plainly showed, both in Joseph's presence and in his absence, that she had no feeling good or ill about the past, I indulged, as did Uriel and Père Bastien, in tranquil and joyous thoughts. Charlot, finding that everybody petted him, began to forget the man who had frightened and bruised him. Every now and then he would start and look behind him at some trifling noise, but Thérence laughingly assured him the man was safely gone and would not return. We seemed like a family party, and I thought to myself, while courting Thérence with the utmost deference, that I would make my love less imperious and more patient than Joseph's. Brulette seemed anxious and overcome, as though cut to the heart by a foul blow. Uriel was uneasy about her, but the head woodsman, who knew the human soul in all its windings, and who was so good that his face and his words poured balm into every wound, took her little hands in his and drew her pretty head to his breast, saying at the end of the meal, "Brulette, we have one thing to ask of you, and though you look so sad and distressed, my son and I will venture to make our request now. Won't you give us a smile of encouragement?" "Tell me what it is, father, and I will obey you," answered Brulette. Well, my daughter, it is that you will present us tomorrow to your grandfather, so that he may be asked to accept Uriel as a grandson." "Oh, it is too soon, father," cried Brulette, shedding a few more tears. "Or rather, it is too late. If you had told me to do so an hour ago, before Joseph uttered those words, I would gladly have consented. But now I confess I should be ashamed to accept so readily the love of an honest man, when I find I am no longer supposed to be an honest girl. I knew I had been blamed for coquetry. Your son himself twitted me about it a year ago. Thérence blamed me, though for all that she gave me her friendship. So, seeing that Uriel had the courage to leave me without asking for anything, I made a great many reflections in my own mind. The good God helped me by sending me this child, whom I did not like at first and might possibly have rejected, if my sense of duty had not been mixed with a sort of idea that I should be better worthy of being loved through a little suffering and self-denial than for my chatter and my pretty clothes. I thought I could atone for my thoughtless years and trample my love for my own little person underfoot. I knew that I was criticized and neglected, but I consoled myself with the thought, if he comes back to me he will know that I do not deserve to be blamed for getting serious and sensible. But now I have heard something very different, partly through Joseph's conduct, partly by Thérence's remark. It was not Joseph only who thought I had gone astray, but Uriel also, or his great heart and his strong love would have had no need to say to his sister yesterday, 'Guilty or not guilty, I love her, and will take her as she is.' Ah, Uriel, I thank you, but I will not let you marry me till you know me. I should suffer too much to see you blamed, as you doubtless would be, on my account. I respect you too much to let it be said that you take upon yourself the paternity of a foundling. I must indeed have been light in my behaviour, or such an accusation could never have been made against me. Well, I wish you to judge me now by my everyday conduct. I want you to be sure that I am not only a gay dancer at a wedding, but the good guardian of my duty in my home. We will come and live here as you desire it, and in a year from now, if I am not able to prove to you that my care of Charlot need not cause me to blush, I shall at least have given you by my actions a proof that I am reasonable in mind and sound in conscience." Uriel snatched Brulette from his father's arms, and reverently kissed the tears that were flowing from her beautiful eyes. Then he gave her back to Père Bastien, saying, "Bless her, my father, for you can now judge if I told you false when I said she was worthy of your blessing. The dear golden tongue has spoken well, and there is no answer to make to it, unless it be that we want neither year nor day of trial, but desire to go this very evening and ask her of her grandfather. For to pass another night still doubtful of his consent is more than I can bear, and to get it is all I need to make me sovereign of the world." "See what has happened to you by asking for a respite," said Père Bastien to Brulette. "Instead of asking your grandfather tomorrow, it seems it must be tonight. Come, my child, you must submit. It is the punishment of your naughty conduct in times gone by." Contentment overspread her sweet face, and the hurt she had received from Joseph was forgotten. However, just as we left the table, another hesitation seized her. Charlot, hearing Uriel address the head woodsman as father, called him so himself, and was kissed and fondled for it, but Brulette was a trifle vexed. "Wouldn't it be best," she said, "to take the trouble to invent parents for the poor child? Every time he calls me mother, it seems like a stab to those I love." We were beginning to reassure her on this point, when Thérence said, "Speak low, someone is listening to us," and following her glance toward the porch, we saw the end of a stick resting on the ground, and the bulging side of a full sack, showing that a beggar was there, waiting till someone took notice of him, and hearing things that he ought not to hear. I went up to the intruder and recognized Brother Nicolas, who came forward at once and admitted without hesitation that he had been listening for the last quarter of an hour, and had been very well pleased with what he had heard. "I thought I knew Uriel's voice," he said, "but I so little expected to find him on my rounds that I should not have been certain, my dear friends, that it was he, but for some things which you have been saying, in which, as Brulette knows, I have a right to intrude." "We know it too," said Uriel. "Do you?" exclaimed the monk. "Well, that's as it should be." "And the reason is," said Uriel to Brulette, "that your aunt told me everything last night. So you see, dearest, I don't deserve all the credit you give me." "Yes," said Brulette, much comforted, "but yesterday morning. Well, since everything is known," she added, turning to the monk, "what do you advise me to do, Brother Nicolas? You have been employed on Charlot's account. Can't you find some story to spread about to cover the secret of his parentage and repair the harm done to my reputation?" "Story," said the friar. "I advise and abet a lie. I am not one of those who damn their souls for the love of the young girls, my little one. I should gain nothing by it. You must be helped some other way, and I have already been working at it more than you think. Have patience. All will come out right, as it did in another matter where, as Maître Uriel knows, I have not been a bad friend to him." "I know that I owe you the peace and safety of my life," said Uriel. "People may say what they like of monks. I know one, at least, for whom I would be drawn and quartered. Sit down, brother, and spend the day with us. What is ours is yours, and the house we are in is yours too." Thérence and the head woodsman were showing their hospitality to the good friar, when my aunt Margiton came hurrying up, and would not let us stay anywhere but with her. She said the wedding party were going to perform the cabbage ceremony, which is an old-fashioned foolery practised the day after the marriage. The procession, she said, was already forming and was coming round our way. The company drank and sang and danced at each stopping-place. It was impossible for Thérence now to keep aloof, and she accepted my arm to go and meet the crowd, while Uriel escorted Brulette. My aunt took charge of the little one, and the head woodsman marched off with the monk, who was easily persuaded into joining a jovial company. The fellow who played the part of gardener, or as we still say among us, the pagan, seated on a hand-barrow, was decorated in a style that astonished everybody. He had picked up near the park a beautiful garland of water-lilies tied with a silver ribbon, which he had bound about his flaxen pole. It didn't take us much time to recognize Joseph's bunch, which he had dropped or thrown away on leaving us. The ribbons were the envy of all the girls of the party, who deliberated how to get possession of them unspoiled. At last, flinging themselves on the pagan, they snatched them away from him and divided the booty, though in defending himself he managed to kiss more than one with a mouth that was covered with foam. So scraps of Joseph's ribbon glittered all day in the caps of the prettiest girls in the neighbourhood, and came to a much better end than their owner thought for when he left his bunch in the dust of the road. This farce, played from door to door through the village, was as crazy as usual, ending with a fine repast and dancing till twilight. After which, we all took leave, Brulette and I, the head woodsman, Thérence and Uriel, and started for Nohant, with the monk at our head, leading the clairin, on which Charlot was perched, tipsy with excitement at what he had seen, laughing like a monkey, and trying to sing as he had heard others do all that day. Though the young people of the present age have degenerated woefully, you must often have seen girls in their teens tramping 15 miles in the morning, and as much more in the evening in the hottest weather, for a day's dancing, and so you can easily believe that we arrived at home without fatigue. Indeed, we danced part of the way along the road, we four, the head woodsman playing his bagpipe, and the friar declaring we were crazy, but clapping his hands to excite us on. We reached Brulette's door about 10 at night, and found Père Brulet sound asleep in his bed. As he was quite deaf and slept hard, Brulette put the baby to bed, served us a little collation, and consulted with us whether to wake him before he had finished his first nap. However, turning over on his side, he saw the light, recognized his granddaughter and me, seemed surprised at the others, and sitting up in bed as sober as a judge, listened to a statement the head woodsman made to him in a few words, spoken rather loud but very civilly. The monk, in whom Père Brulet had the utmost confidence, followed in praise of the Uriel family, and Uriel himself declared his wishes and all his good intentions, both present and to come. Père Brulet listened without saying a word, and I began to fear he had not understood. But no such thing. Though he seemed to be dreaming, his mind was really quite clear, and he presently answered discreetly that he recognized in the head woodsman the son of a former friend, that he held the family in much esteem, and considered brother Nicolas as worthy of all confidence, and above all he trusted in the sense and good judgment of his granddaughter. Then he went on to say that she had not delayed her choice and refused the best offers of the neighbourhood to commit a folly in the end, and that if she wished to marry Uriel, Uriel would certainly be a good husband. He spoke in a collected manner, yet his memory failed him on one point, which he recalled soon after, as we were about to take leave, namely that Uriel was a muleteer. "That is the only thing that troubles me," he said. "My girl will be so lonely at home by herself for 3/4 of the year." We satisfied him at once with the news that Uriel had left the craft and become a woodsman, and thereupon he readily agreed to the plan of working in the woods of Chassin during the summer months. We parted, all well pleased with one another. Thérence stayed with Brulette, and I took the others to my own house. We learned the next evening, through the monk, who had been begging about all day, that Joseph had not gone near the village of Nohant, but had spent an hour with his mother at Saint-Chartier, after which he started to go round the neighbourhood and collect all the bagpipers for a meeting, at which he would demand a competition for admission to the craft and the right to practise the calling. Mariton was much troubled by this determination, believing that the Carnats, father and son, and all the bagpipers of the country round, who were already more in number than were needed, would oppose it and cause him both trouble and injury. But Joseph would not listen to her, still saying that he was resolved to get her out of service and take her to some distant place to live with him, though she seemed not as much inclined to that idea as he had hoped. On the third day, all our preparations having been made, and Uriel and Brulet's first banns published in the parish church, we started to return to Chassin. It was like departing on a pilgrimage to the ends of the earth. We were obliged to carry furniture, for Brulet was determined that her grandfather should lack for nothing. So a cart was hired, and the whole village opened its eyes very wide to see the entire contents of the house going off, even to the baskets. The goats and the hens went too, for Thérence was delighted at the idea of taking care of them. Never having known how to manage animals, she wanted to learn, as she said, when the opportunity offered. This gave me the chance to propose myself in jest for her management, as the most docile and faithful animal of the flock. She was not annoyed, but gave me no encouragement to pass from jest to earnest. Only it did seem to me that she was not displeased to find me cheerfully leaving home and family to follow her, and that if she did little to attract me, she certainly did still less to repulse me. Just as old Brulet and the women with Charlot were getting into the cart, Brulet very proud of going off with such a handsome lover, in the teeth of all the lovers who had misjudged her, the friar came up to say good-bye, adding for the benefit of the inquisitive ears, "As I am going over to your parts, I'll ride a bit of the way with you." He got up beside Père Brulet, and at the end of the 3rd mile, in a shady road, he asked to be set down. Uriel was leading the Clairin, which was a good draught horse as well as a pack-horse, and the head woodsman and I walked in front. Seeing that the cart lagged behind, we turned back, thinking there might have been an accident, and found Brulette in tears, kissing Charlot, who clung to her, screaming because the friar was endeavouring to carry him off. Uriel interceded against it, for he was so troubled at Brulette's tears that he came near crying himself. "What is the matter?" said Père Bastien. "Why do you wish to send away the child, my daughter? Is it because of the notion you expressed the other day?" "No, father," replied Brulette. "His real parents have sent for him, and it is for his good to go. The poor little fellow can't understand that, and even I, though I do understand it, my heart fails me. But as there are good reasons why the thing should be done without delay, give me courage instead of taking it away from me." Though talking of courage, she had none at all against Charlot's tears and kisses, for she had really come to love him with much tenderness. So Thérence was called in to help her. Every look and tone of the woodland girl conveyed such a sense of her loving kindness that the stones themselves would have been persuaded, and the child felt it, though he did not know why. She succeeded in pacifying him, making him understand that Brulette was leaving him for a short time only, so that Brother Nicolas was able to carry him off without using force, and the pair disappeared to the tune of a sort of rondo which the monk sang to divert his charge, though it was more like a church chant than a song. But Charlot was pleased, and when their voices were lost in the distance, that of the monk had drowned his expiring moans. "Come, Brulette, start on," said Père Bastien. "We love you so well we can soon console you." Uriel jumped on the shaft to be near her, and talked to her so gently all the way that she said to him just before we arrived, "Don't think me inconsolable, my true friend. My heart failed me for a second, but I know where to turn the love I felt for that child, and where I shall find the happiness he gave me." It did not take us long to settle down in the old castle, and even to feel at home in it. There were several habitable chambers, though they hardly looked so, and at first we thought them likely to fall about our heads. But the ruins had so long been shaken by the wind without collapsing that we felt they might outlast our time. Aunt Margiton, delighted to have us near her, furnished the household with the various little comforts to which we were accustomed, and which the Uriel family were coaxed with some difficulty into sharing with us, for they were not used to such things and cared very little for them. The Bourbonnais woodcutters, whom the head woodsman had engaged, arrived duly, and he hired others in the neighbourhood. So that we made quite a colony, quartered partly in the village and partly in the ruins, working cheerfully under the rule of a just man, who knew what it was to spare overwork and to reward the willing workmen, and assembling every night in the courtyard for the evening meal, relating stories and listening to them, singing and frolicking in the open air, and dancing on Sundays with all the lads and lasses of the neighbourhood, who were glad enough to get our Bourbonnais music, and who brought us little gifts from all parts, showing us a deal of attention. The work was hard on account of the steep slopes on which the forest grew, which rose straight from the river, and made the felling a very dangerous matter. I had had the experience of the quick temper of the head woodsman in the woods of Alleux. As he was employing none but choice workmen for the felling, and the choppers understood the cutting up, nothing happened to irritate him. But I was ambitious to become a first-class chopper in order to please him, and I dreaded lest my want of practice should once more make him call me unhandy and imprudent, which would have mortified me cruelly in presence of Thérence. So I begged Uriel to take me apart and show me how to work, and to let me watch him at the business. He was quite willing to oblige me, and I went at it with such a will that before long I surprised the master himself by my ability. He praised me, and even asked me before his daughter why I took hold so valiantly of a business I had no occasion for in my own country. Because, I replied, I am not sorry to know how to earn my living wherever I am. Who knows what may happen? If I loved a woman who wanted me to live in the depths of the woods, I could follow her and support her there as elsewhere. To prove to Thérence that I was not so self-indulgent as perhaps she thought, I practised sleeping on the bare ground and living frugally, trying to become as hardy a forester as the rest of them. I did not find myself any the worse for it. In fact, I felt that my mind grew more active and my thoughts clearer. Many things that I did not at first understand without long explanations unravelled themselves little by little of their own accord, so that Thérence had no longer any occasion to smile at my stupid questions. She talked to me without getting weary and appeared to feel confidence in my judgment. Still, a full fortnight went by before I felt the slightest hope of success, though when I bemoaned myself to Uriel that I dared not say a word to a girl who seemed so far above me that she could never so much as look at me, he replied, "Don't worry, Tiennet, my sister has the truest heart in existence, and if, like all young girls, she has her fanciful moments, there is no fancy in her head which will not yield to the love of a noble truth and an honest devotion." His father said the same, and together they lent me courage. And Thérence found me so good an attendant, I watched so closely that no pain, fatigue, or annoyance should touch her from any cause within my power to control, and I was so careful never to look at another girl. Indeed, I had little desire to. In short, I behaved myself with such honest respect, showing her plainly on what a pinnacle I set her, that her eyes began to open, and several times I saw her watch how I went beforehand of her wishes with a softened, reflective look, and then reward me with thanks of which, I can tell you, I was proud enough. She was not accustomed, like Brulette, to have her wishes anticipated, and would never have known, like her, how to encourage it prettily. She seemed surprised that any one thought of her, and when it did happen she showed such a sense of obligation that I never felt at my ease when she said to me with her serious air and guileless frankness, "Really, Tiennet, you are too kind, or perhaps, Tiennet, you take too much trouble for me. I wish I could take as much for you some day." One morning she was speaking to me in this way before a number of woodcutters, and one of them, a handsome Bourbonnais lad, remarked in a low tone that she showed a deal of interest in me. "Certainly I do, Léonard," she replied, looking at him with a confident air. "I feel the interest that is due to him for all his kindness and friendship to me and mine." "Don't you know that everyone would do as he does," remarked Léonard, "if they thought they would be paid in the same coin?" "I would try to be just to everybody," she replied, "if I felt a liking or a need for everybody's attention. But I don't, and to one of my disposition the friendship of one person suffices." I was sitting on the turf beside her as she said this, and I took her hand in mine, without daring to retain it more than a second. She drew it away, but as she did so, she let it rest a moment on my shoulder, in sign of confidence and relationship of soul. However, things still went on in this way, and I began to suffer greatly from the reserve between us, all the more because the lovers Uriel and Brulette were so tender and happy, and the contrast grieved my heart and troubled my spirit. Their day of joy was coming, but mine was not within sight. End of section 28. Section 29 of the Bagpipers by Georges Sand. Translated by Catherine Prescott Wormley. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. 29th Evening. One Sunday, it was that of the last publication of Brulet's banns, the head woodsman and his son, who had seemed all day to be consulting privately, went off together, saying that a matter connected with the marriage called them to Nohant. Brulette, who knew all about the arrangements for her wedding, was a good deal surprised at their sudden activity, and still more that they told her nothing about it. She was even inclined to pout at Uriel, who said he should be absent for 24 hours. But he would not yield, and managed to pacify her by letting her think he was only going on her business, and planning to give her some pleasant surprise. But Thérence, whom I watched narrowly, seemed to me to make an effort to hide her uneasiness, and as soon as her father and Uriel had started, she carried me off into the little park and said, "Tiennet, I am worried to death, and I don't know what can be done to remedy matters. Listen to what has happened, and tell me if we can do anything to prevent harm. Last night, as I lay awake, I heard my father and brother agreeing to go and protect Joseph, and from what they said I made out that Joseph, though very ill-received by the bagpipers of your parts, to whom he applied for admission to the guild, is determined to insist on admittance, a thing that they dare not refuse him openly without having put his talents to the test. It appears that the younger Carnat has also applied for admittance in place of his father, who retires, and his trial was to take place before the corporation this very day, so that Joseph has put himself forward to interfere with a claim that was not to be contested, and which was promised and half granted in advance. Now some of our woodcutters who frequent the wine-shops have overheard certain wicked plans which the bagpipers of your neighbourhood are making, for they are resolved to eject Joseph, if they can, by sneering at his music. If there was no greater risk than his having to bear injustice and defeat, I should not be so uneasy as you see me. But my father and brother, who belong to the guild and have a voice in all proceedings, feel it their duty to be present at this competition solely to protect Joseph. And, more than that, there was something I could not make out, because the guild have certain secret terms among themselves, which my father and brother used, and which I did not understand. But however one looks at it, I am sure they are going into danger, for they carried under their blouses those little single sticks, the harm of which you have already seen, and they even sharpened their pruning hooks and hid them under their clothes, saying to each other early this morning, "The devil is in that lad, he can neither be happy himself nor let others be." We must protect him, however, though he is obstinately rushing among the wolves, without thinking of his own skin or that of others. My brother complained, saying he did not want to break anybody's head or have his own broken just as he was going to be married. To which my father replied that there was no use in anticipating evil. What one had to do was to go where humanity required us to help our neighbour. As they named Léonard among those who had overheard the malicious talk, I questioned him hastily just now, and he told me that Joseph, and consequently those who support him, have been threatened for a week or more, and that your bagpipers talk of not only refusing him admittance at this competition, but also of depriving him of the wish and the power to try again. I know, from having heard it spoken of as a child when my brother was admitted, that the candidates must behave boldly and endure all sorts of trials of their strength and courage. With us, the bagpipers lead a wandering life and do not make their music so much of a business as yours do. Therefore they don't stand in each other's way and never persecute the candidates. It seems, from what Léonard told me and from my father's preparations, that here it is different, and that such matters end in fights which last till one or the other side gives up. Help me, Tiennet, for I am half dead with fear and anxiety. I dare not rouse our woodcutters. If my father thought I had overheard and betrayed the secrets of the guild, he would deny me all trust and confidence in future. He expects me to be as brave as any woman can be in danger, but ever since that dreadful Malzac affair, I own to you I have no courage at all, and that I am tempted to fling myself into the middle of the fight, so much do I dread the results for those I love. "And you call that want of courage, my brave girl?" I replied. "Now don't be troubled, and leave me to act. The devil will be very cunning if I can't discover for myself, without suspicion falling on you, what those bagpipers are about. And if your father blames me, if he even drives me away and refuses the happiness I have been hoping to win, I shall not care, Thérence, so long as I bring him or send him safe back to you, and Uriel also, I shall have my reward, even if I never see you again. Goodbye. Don't give way to anxiety. Say nothing to Brulette, for she would lose her head. I know what should be done. Look as if you knew nothing. I take it all on my shoulders." Thérence flung herself on my breast and kissed me on both cheeks with the innocence of a pure girl. So, filled to the brim with courage and confidence, I went to work. I began by finding Léonard, whom I knew to be a good fellow, very bold and strong, and much attached to Père Bastien. Though he was rather jealous of me on the score of Thérence, he entered into my scheme, and I questioned him as to the number of bagpipers who were to meet for the competition, and the place where we could watch the assembly. He could not tell me anything under the first head. As to the second, he knew that the trial was not to be in secret, and the place appointed was Saint-Chartier, in Benoit's tavern, an hour after vespers. The deliberation on the merits of the candidates was all that was to be held in secret, and even that was to be in the same house, and the decision was to be rendered in public. I thought of half a dozen resolute lads fully able to keep the peace if, as Thérence feared, the matter should end in a quarrel, and I felt that justice being on our side, plenty of other fellows would come forward to support us. So I chose 4 who consented to follow me, making with Léonard and myself 6 in all. They hesitated only on one point, the fear of displeasing their master, the head woodsman, by giving him help he had never asked for. But I swore to them that he should never know that they gave it deliberately, for we could easily pretend we were there by accident, and then, if anyone were blamed, they could throw it all on me, who had asked them there to drink without their knowing what was going on. So it was all agreed, and I went to tell Thérence that we were fully prepared against every danger. After which we started, each carrying a stout cudgel, and reached Saint-Chartier at the hour named. Benoit's wine shop was so full there was no turning round in it, and we were obliged to take a table outside. Indeed, I was not sorry to leave my contingent there, exhorting them not to get drunk, and to slip myself into the shop, where I counted 16 professional bagpipers, without reckoning Uriel and his father, who were sitting at table in a dark corner with their hats over their eyes, and all the less likely to be recognized because few of those present had met them in our parts. I pretended not to see them, and speaking so they could hear me, I asked Benoit what this meeting of bagpipers was for, as if I had not heard a word about it, and did not understand its object. "Why, don't you know," said the host, who was getting over his illness but was pallid and much reduced, "that your old friend Joseph, the son of my housekeeper, is going to compete with Carnat's son? I must say it is great folly on his part," added Benoit, lowering his voice. "His mother is much distressed, and fears the ill will that grows out of these competitions. Indeed, she is so troubled that she has lost her head, and the customers are complaining for the first time that she does not serve them properly." "Can I help you?" I said, glad to get a reason for staying inside and going about among the tables. "Faith, my boy," he replied, "if you really mean it, you can do me good service, for I don't deny that I am still pretty weak, and I can't stoop to draw the wine without getting giddy. Here is the key of the cellar. Take charge of filling and bringing in the jugs. I hope that Mariton and her scullions can do the rest." I didn't need telling twice. I ran out for an instant to tell my companions of the employment I had taken for the good of the cause, and then I went to work as a tapster, which enabled me to see and hear everything. Joseph and the younger Carnat were at either end of a long table feasting the guild, each taking the guests halfway down. There was more noise than pleasure going on. The company was shouting and singing to avoid talking, for they were all on the defensive, and it was easy to feel the jealousies and self-interests heaving below. I soon observed that all the bagpipers were not, as I had feared, in favour of the Carnats against Joseph, for no matter how well a guild is managed, there are always old grudges which set members by the ears. But I also saw, little by little, that there was no comfort to Joseph in this, because those who did not want his rival wanted him still less, and hoped to get the number of professional bagpipers lessened by the retirement of old Carnat. I even fancied that the greater number thought in this way, and I concluded that both candidates would be rejected. After feasting for about 2 hours, the competition began. Silence was not demanded, for bagpipes in a room are instruments that don't trouble themselves about other noises, and the shouters and talkers soon gave up the contest. A crowd of people pressed in from outside. My 5 comrades climbed on the open window-sill, and I went and stood near them. Uriel and his father did not stir from their corner. Carnat, who drew the lot to begin, mounted the bread-box, and, encouraged by his father, who could not restrain himself from beating time with his sabots, played for half an hour on the old-fashioned bagpipe of the country with its narrow windbag. He played very badly, being much agitated, and I saw that this pleased the greater part of the bagpipers. They kept silence, as they always did, so as to seem solemn and important, but others present kept silence too. This hurt the poor fellow, who had hoped for a little encouragement, and his father began to growl and to show his revengeful and malicious nature. When Joseph's turn came, he tore himself away from his mother, who was still entreating him in a low voice not to compete. He too mounted the box, holding his great Bourbonnaise bagpipe with great ease, the which quite dazzled the eyes of all present with its silver ornaments, its bits of looking-glass, and the great length of its pipes. Joseph carried himself proudly, looking round contemptuously on those who were to hear him. Everyone noticed his good looks, and the young fellows about asked if he could really be José the Dallard, whom they had once thought so stupid and seen so puny. But his haughty air disgusted everybody, and as soon as the sound of his instrument filled the room, there was more fear than pleasure in the curiosity he excited. Nevertheless, there were present persons who knew good music, particularly the choir of the parish church and the hemp spinners, who were great judges, and even elderly women, guardians of the good things of the past. And among such as these, Joseph's music was quickly accepted, as much for the easy manner in which he used his instrument as for the good taste he displayed and the correct rendering which he gave to the new and very beautiful airs he played. A remark being made by the Carnats that his bagpipe, having a fuller sound, gave him an advantage, he unscrewed it and used only the chanter, which he played so well that the music was even more delightful than before. Finally he took Carnat's old-fashioned bagpipe, and played it so cleverly that anyone would have said it was another instrument than the one first used. The judges said nothing, but all others present trembled with pleasure and applauded vehemently, declaring that nothing so fine had ever been heard in our parts. And old Mother Bline de la Breuil, who was 87 years old and neither deaf nor dumb, walked up to the table and, rapping it with her distaff, said to the bagpipers with the freedom her age warranted, "You may make faces as much as you like and shake your heads, but there's not one of you can play against that lad. He'll be talked of 200 years hence, but all your names will be forgotten before your carcasses are rotten in the earth." Then she left the room, saying, as did all present, that if the bagpipers rejected Joseph, it would be the worst injustice that was ever done, and the wickedest jealousy that could be confessed. The conclave of bagpipers now ascended to an upper room, and I hurried to open the door, hoping to gather something by overhearing what they said to each other in going up the stairs. The last to enter were the head woodsman and his son. As they did so, Père Carnat, who recognized Uriel from having seen him with us at the midsummer bonfire, asked what they wanted and by what right they came to the council. "The right of membership in your guild," answered Père Bastien, "and if you doubt it, ask us the usual questions, or try us with any music you like." On this they were allowed to enter, and the door was shut. I tried to listen, but every one spoke in a low voice, and I could not be sure of anything, except that they recognized the right of the two strangers to be present, and that they were deliberating about the competition without either noise or dispute. Through a crack in the door I could see that they divided into parties of 5 or 6, exchanging opinions in a low voice before they began to vote. But when the time for voting came, one of the bagpipers looked out to see if anyone were listening, and I was forced to disappear in a hurry lest I should be caught in a position which would put me to shame without an excuse, for I certainly could not say that my friends were in danger in such a peaceful conclave. I found my young fellows below, sitting at a table with others of our acquaintance, who were toasting and complimenting Joseph. Carnat the younger was alone and gloomy in a corner, forgotten and mortified. The monk was there too, in the chimney-corner, inquiring of Mariton and Benoit what was going on. When told all about it, he came up to the long table where they were drinking with Joseph, and asked him where and from whom he had got his teaching. "Friend Joseph," said he, "we know each other, you and I wish to add my voice to the applause you are now of good right receiving. But permit me to point out that it is generous as well as wise to console the vanquished, and that in your place I should make friendly advances to young Carnat, whom I see over there all alone and very sad." The monk spoke so as to be heard only by Joseph and a few others who were near him, and I thought he did so as much out of kind-heartedness as by instigation of Joseph's mother, who wanted the Carnats to get over their aversion to her son. This appeal to Joseph's generosity flattered his vanity. "You are right, brother Nicolas," he said. Then in a loud voice he called to young Carnat, "Come, François, don't sulk at your friends. You did not play as well as you know how to, I am quite sure. But you shall have your revenge another time. Besides, judgment is not given yet. So instead of turning your back on us, come and drink, and let us be as quiet together as a pair of oxen yoked to a cart." Everybody approved of this speech, and Carnat, fearing to seem jealous, accepted the offer and sat down near him. So far so good, but Joseph could not keep from showing his opinion that his art was far above that of others, and in offering civilities to his rival he put on such a patronizing manner that Carnat was more hurt than ever. "You talk as if you were already elected," he said, "and it is no such thing. It is not always for the skill of the fingers and the cleverest compositions that those who know what they are about select a man. Sometimes they choose him for being the best known and the most respected player in the country, for that makes him a good comrade to the rest of the guild." "Oh, I expect that," returned Joseph. "I have been long absent, and though I pique myself on deserving as much respect as any man, Yet I know they will try to fall back on the foolish reason that I am little known. Well, I don't care for that, Francois. I did not expect to find a company of good musicians among you, capable of judging me or my merits, and lovers enough of true knowledge to prefer my talent to their own interests and that of their acquaintances. All that I wanted was to be heard and judged by my mother and friends, by intelligent ears and reasonable beings. For the rest, I laugh at your screaming and bellowing bagpipes, and I must say, God forgive me, that I shall be prouder of being rejected than accepted." The monk remarked gently that he was not speaking judiciously. "You should not challenge the judges you demanded of your own free will," he said. "Pride spoils the highest merit." "Leave him his pride," said Carnat. "I am not jealous of what he can show. He ought to have some talent to cover his other misfortunes. Remember the old saying, good player, good dupe." "What do you mean by that?" said Joseph, setting down his glass and looking the other in the eye. "I am not obliged to tell you," said Carnat. "All the others understand it." "But I don't understand it, and as you are speaking to me, I'll call you a coward if you dare not explain yourself." "Oh, I can tell you to your face," returned Carnat. "It is something that need not offend you at all, for perhaps it is no more your fault to be unlucky in love than it is mine to be unlucky tonight in music." "Come, come," said one of the young men who were present. "Let Josette alone. She has found someone to marry her, and that's enough. It is nobody's business." "It is my opinion," said another, "that it was not Joseph who was tricked in that affair, but the other who is going to shoulder his work." "Whom are you speaking of?" cried Joseph, as if his head were reeling. "Who is it you call Josette? What wicked nonsense are you trying on me?" "Hold your tongues," cried Mariton, turning scarlet with anger and grief, as she always did when Brulette was attacked. "I wish your wicked tongues were torn out and nailed to the church door." "Speak lower," said one of the young men. "You know that Mariton won't allow a word against her José's fair friend. All beauties uphold each other, and Mariton is not yet so old but what she has a voice in the chapter." Joseph was puzzling his brains to know whether they were blaming or ridiculing him. "Explain it to me," he said, pulling me by the arm. "Don't leave me without a word to say." I was just going to meddle, though I had vowed I wouldn't get into any dispute in which Père Bastien and his son were not concerned, when François Carnat cut me short. "Nonsense," he said to Joseph with a sneer. "Tiennet can't tell you any more than what I wrote you." "That is what you were talking of, is it?" said Joseph. "Well, I swear you lie, and that you have written and signed false witness." "Never." "Bravo!" cried Carnat. "You knew how to make your profit out of my letter. And if, as people think, you are the author of that child, you have not been such a fool after all in getting rid of your property to a friend. A faithful friend, too, for there he is upstairs, looking after your interests in the council. But if, as I now think, you came into these parts to assert your right to the child, which was refused, that accounts for a queer scene which I saw from a distance at the castle of Chassin." "What scene?" said the monk. "Let me tell you, young man, that I too may have witnessed it, and I want to know how truly you relate the things that you see." "As you please," returned Carnat. "I will tell you what I saw with my own eyes, without hearing a word that was said, and you may explain it as you can. You are to know, the rest of you, that on the last day of last month Joseph got up early in the morning to hang his May bunch on Brulette's door, and seeing a baby about 2 years old, which of course was his, he wanted no doubt to get possession of it, for he seized it, as if to go off with it, and then began a sharp dispute, in which his friend the Bourbonnais woodcutter, the same that is upstairs now with his father and who is to marry Brulette next Sunday, struck him violently and then embraced the mother and child, after which Joseph was gently shoved out of the door and did not show his face there again. I call that one of the queerest histories I ever knew. Twist it as you will, it still remains the tale of a child claimed by 2 fathers, and of a girl who, instead of giving herself to the first seducer, kicks him away as unworthy or incapable of bringing up the child of their loves." Instead of answering as he had proposed to do, Brother Nicolas returned to the chimney and talked in a low voice but very eagerly with Benoit. Joseph was so taken aback at the interpretation put upon a matter of which, after all, he did not know the real meaning, that he looked all round him for assistance, and as Mariton had rushed from the room like a crazy woman, there was no one but me to put down Carnat. The latter's speech had created some astonishment, but no one thought of defending Brulette, against whom they still felt piqued. I began to take her part, but Carnat interrupted me at the first word. "Oh, as for you," he said, "no one accuses you. I dare say you played your part in good faith, though it is known that you were used to deceive people by bringing the child from the Bourbonnais. But you are so simple, Tiennet, that you may never have suspected anything. The devil take me," he continued, addressing the company, "if that fellow isn't as stupid as a basket. He is capable of being godfather to a child, believing all the while they were christening a clock. He probably went into the Bourbonnais to fetch this godson of his, who, they told him, was found in a cabbage, and he brought it back in a pilgrim's sack. In fact, he is such a slave and good cousin to the girl, that if she had tried to make him believe the boy was like him, he would have thought so too." End of section 29. Section 30 of the Bagpipers by Georges Sand, translated by Catherine Prescott Wormley. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. 30th Evening. There was no use in protesting and getting angry. The company were more inclined to laugh than to listen, for it is always a great delight to misbehaving fellows to speak ill of a poor girl. They make haste to plunge her in the mire, reserving the right to deny it if they find she is innocent. In the midst of their slanderous speeches, however, a loud voice, slightly weakened by illness but still capable of drowning every other in the room, made itself heard. It was that of the master of the tavern, long accustomed to quell the dissensions of wine and the hubbub of junketing. "Hold your tongues," he said, "and listen to me, or I'll turn you out this moment, if I never open the house again. Be silent about an honest girl whom you decry because you have all found her too virtuous. As to the real parents of the child who has given rise to these tales, tell them to their face what fault you find with them, for here they are before you. Yes," he continued, drawing Mariton, who was holding Charlot in her arms and weeping, up to him, "here is the mother of my heir, and this is my son whom I recognize by my marriage to this good woman. If you ask me for exact dates, I shall tell you to mind your own business. Nevertheless, to any who have the right to question me, I will show deeds which prove that I have always recognized the child as mine, and that his mother was my legitimate wife before his birth, though the matter was kept secret." The silence of astonishment fell on everybody, and Joseph, who had risen at the first words, stood stock still like a stone image. The monk, who noticed the doubt, shame, and anger in his eyes, thought best to add further explanations. He told us that Benoit had been unable to make his marriage public because of the opposition of a rich relative, who had lent him money for his business, and who might have ruined him by demanding it back. As Mariton feared for her reputation, especially on account of her son Joseph, they had concealed Charlot's birth and had put him to nurse at Saint-Sever. But at the end of a year Mariton had found him so ill-used that she begged Brulette to take charge of him, thinking that no one else would give him as much care. She had not foreseen the harm this would do to the young girl, and when she did find it out, she wished to remove the child. But Benoit's illness had prevented her doing so, and moreover Brulette had become so attached to Charlot that she would not part with him. "Yes," cried Mariton, "poor dear soul that she is, she proved her courage for me. You will have trouble enough," she said to me, "if you lose your husband, and perhaps your marriage will be questioned by the family. He is too ill to trouble him now about declaring it. Have patience, don't kill him by talking of your affairs. Everything will come right if God grant that he recovers." "And if I have recovered," added Benoit, "it is by the care of this good woman, my wife, and the kind-heartedness of the young girl in question, who patiently endured both blame and insult rather than cause me injury at the time by exposing our secrets. And here is another faithful friend," he added, pointing to the monk, "a man of sense, of action, and of honest speech, an old school friend of mine in the days when I was educating at Montluçon. He it was who went after my old devil of an uncle, and who at last, no later than this morning, persuaded him to consent to my marriage with my good housekeeper. And when my uncle had given his word to make me heir to his whole property, Brother Nicolas told him the priest had already joined Mariton and me, and showed him that fat Charlot, whom he thought a fine boy and very like the author of his existence." Benoit's satisfaction revived the lost gaiety of the party. Everyone was struck with the resemblance, which, however, no one had yet noticed, I as little as any. "So, Joseph," continued the innkeeper, "you can and ought to love and respect your mother, just as I love and respect her. I take my oath here and now that she is the bravest and most helpful Christian woman that ever a sick man had about him. And I have never had a moment's hesitation in my resolve to declare sooner or later what I have declared today. We are now very well off in our worldly affairs, thank God, and as I swore to her and to God that I would replace the father you lost, I will agree, if you will live here with us, to take you into partnership and to give you a good share of the profits. So you needn't fling yourself into bagpiping, in which your mother sees all sorts of ills for you and anxieties for her. Your notion was to get her a home. That's my affair now, and I even offer to make hers yours. Come, you'll listen to us, won't you, and give up that damned music? Why can't you live in your own country and stay at home? You needn't blush at having an honest innkeeper for a stepfather." "You are my stepfather, that's very certain," replied Joseph, not showing either pleasure or displeasure, but remaining coldly on the defensive. "You are an honest man, I know, and rich, I see, and if my mother is happy with you—" "Yes, yes, Joseph, as happy as possible. Above all today," cried Mariton, kissing him, "for I hope you will never leave me again." "You are mistaken, mother," answered Joseph. "You no longer have any need of me, and you are contented. All is well. You were the only thing that brought me back into this part of the country. You were all I had to love, for Brulette, and it is well that all present should hear this from my own mouth, for Brulette never had any feeling but that of a sister for me. Now I am free to follow my destiny, which is not a very kindly one, but it is so plainly mine that I prefer it to all the money of innkeeping and the comfort of family life. Farewell, mother, God bless those who make you happy. As for me, I want nothing in these parts, not even admission to the guild which evil-intentioned fools are trying to deny me. My inward thoughts and my bagpipe go with me wherever I am, and I know I can always earn my living, for wherever my music is heard I shall be welcome." As he spoke, the door to the staircase opened, and the whole company of bagpipers entered in silence. Père Carnat requested the attention of those present, and in a firm and cheerful manner which surprised everybody, he said, "François Carnat, my son, after careful examination of your merits and full discussion of your rights, you are declared too much of a novice for present admission. You are advised to study a while longer, without discouragement, so as to present yourself for competition later when circumstances may be more favourable. And you, Joseph Picot, of the village of Nohant, the decision of the masters of this part of the country is that you be, by reason of your unparalleled talents, received into the first class of the guild, and this decision is unanimous." "Well," replied Joseph, who seemed wholly indifferent to his victory and to the applause with which it was received, "as the matter has turned out this way, I accept the decision, although, not expecting it, I hardly care for it." Joseph's haughty manner displeased everybody, and Père Carnat hastened to say, with an air which I thought showed disguised malignity, "Does that mean, Joseph, that you wish for the honour and the title, and do not intend to take your place among the professional bagpipers in these parts?" "I don't know yet," said Joseph, evidently by way of bravado, and not wishing to satisfy his judges. "I'll think about it." "I believe," said young Carnat to his father, "that he has thought about it already, and his decision is made, for he hasn't the courage to go on with the matter." "Courage?" cried Joseph. "Courage for what, if you please?" Then the Dean of the Bagpipers, old Paillou of Verneuil, said to Joseph, "You are surely not ignorant, young man, that something more than playing an instrument is required to be received into our guild. There is such a thing as a musical catechism, which you must know and on which you will be questioned, if you feel you have the knowledge and also the boldness to answer. Moreover, there are certain oaths to be taken. If you feel no repugnance to these things, you must decide at once to submit to them, so that the matter may be settled tomorrow morning." "I understand you," said Joseph. "The guild has secret oaths, and tests and trials. They are all great folly as far as I know, and music has no part in them, for I defy you to reply to any musical question which I might put to you. Consequently, the questions you address to me on a subject you know less about than the frogs in the pond are no better than old women's gabble." "If you take it that way," said René, the mare bagpiper, "we are willing that you should think yourself a great genius and the rest of us jackasses. So be it. Keep your secrets and we will keep ours. We are not anxious to tell them to those who despise us. But remember one thing. Here is your certificate as a master bagpiper, which we now hand to you, signed and sealed by all, including your friends the Bourbonnais bagpipers, who agree that all is done in good order. You are free to exercise your talents where you please and where you can, except in the parishes where we play and which number 150, according to the distribution we make among ourselves, the list of which will be handed to you. In those parishes you are forbidden to play. We give notice that if you break this rule it will be at your own risk and peril, for we shall put a stop to it, if need be, by main force." Here Mariton spoke up. "You needn't threaten him," she said. "It is safe to leave him to his own fancy, which is to play his music and look for no profit. He has no need to do that, thank God, and besides, his lungs are not strong enough for your business. Come, Joseph, thank them for the honour I have done you, and don't keep them anxious about their interests. Let the matter be settled now, and here's my man who will pay the pipers with a good quartern of Sancerre or Issoudun wine, at the choice of the company." "That's all right," said old Carnat. "We are quite willing the matter should end thus. It is best, no doubt, for your son, for one needn't be either a fool or a coward to shrink from the tests, and I do think the poor fellow is not cut out to endure them." "We will see about that," cried Joseph, falling into the trap that was set for him, in spite of the warnings Père Bastien was giving him in a low voice. "I demand the tests, and as you have no right to refuse them after delivering to me the certificate, I intend to practice your calling if I choose, or at any rate to prove that I am not prevented from doing so by any of you." "Agreed," said the Dean, showing plainly, as did Carnat and several others, the malignant pleasure Joseph's words afforded them. "We will now prepare for your initiation, friend Joseph. Remember there is no going back, and that you will be considered a milksop or a braggart if you change your mind." Go on," cried Joseph. "I'll await you on a firm foot." "It is for us to await you," said old Carnat in his ear, "at the stroke of midnight." "Where?" said Joseph coolly. "At the gate of the cemetery," replied the Dean in a low voice. Then, without accepting the wine which Benoit offered them, or giving heed to the remonstrances of his wife, they went off in a body, threatening evil to all who followed them or spied upon their mysteries. The head woodsman and Uriel went with them without a word to Joseph, by which I plainly saw that, although the pair were opposed to the spirit of the other bagpipers, they thought it none the less their duty not to warn Joseph, nor to betray in the slightest degree the secrets of the guild. In spite of the threats which were made, I was not deterred from following them at a distance, without other precaution than carelessly sauntering down the same road, with my hands in my pockets, and whistling as if I were paying no attention to them or their affairs. I knew they would not let me get near enough to overhear their plots, but I wanted to make sure in what direction they meant to lie in wait, so as to get there later, if possible, unobserved. With that notion in my head, I signed to Léonard to keep the others at the tavern until I returned to call them. But my pursuit was soon ended. The inn stood on a street which ran downhill to the river, and is now the mail route to Issoudun. In those days it was a breakneck little place, narrow and ill-paved, lined with old houses with pointed gables and stone mullions. The last of these houses was pulled down a year ago. From the river, which ran along the wall below the inn of the Boeuf Couronné, a steep ascent led to the market-place, which was then, as it is now, that long unevenly paved space, planted with trees, bordered on the left by old houses, on the right by the broad moat, full of water, and the great wall, then unbroken, of the castle. The church closes the market-place at the further end, and two alleys lead down from it, one to the parsonage, the other past the cemetery. The bagpipers turned down the latter path. They were about a gunshot in advance of me, that is to say, just time enough to pass along the path by the cemetery and out into the open country by the postern of the English tower, unless they chose to stop at this particular spot, which was not very convenient, for the path, which ran between the moat of the castle on one side and the bank of the cemetery on the other, was only wide enough for one person at a time. When I judged that the bagpipers must have reached the postern, I turned the corner of the castle under an arcade which in those days was used as a footpath by the gentry on their way to the parish church. I found I was all alone when I entered the path by the churchyard, a place few Christian men would set foot in alone after nightfall, not only because it led past the cemetery, but because the north flank of the castle had a bad name. There was talk of I don't know how many persons drowned in the moat in the days of the English war, and some folks swore they had heard the cocodrillos whistle on that particular path when epidemics were about. You know, of course, that the cocodrillo is a sort of lizard, which sometimes seems no bigger than your little finger, and sometimes swells to the size of an ox, and grows 5 or 6 yards long. This beast, which I have never seen and whose existence I couldn't warrant, is supposed to vomit a venom which poisons the air and brings the plague. Now, though I did not believe much of this, I was not over fond of going along this path, where the high wall of the castle and the tall trees of the cemetery shut out every speck of light. On this occasion I walked fast, without looking to the right or left, and passed through the postern of the English gate, of which, by the by, not one stone upon another remains to the present day. Once there, and notwithstanding that the night was fine and the moon clear, I could not see, either far or near, the slightest trace of the 18 persons I was after. I looked in every direction. I even went as far as Père Bernieur's cottage, the only house they could have entered. The occupants were all asleep, and nowhere about was there any noise, or trace or sign of a living person. I therefore concluded that the missing bagpipers had entered the cemetery to perform some wicked conjuring, and though far from liking to do so, but determined to risk all for Terence's relations, I returned through the postern and along the accursed path, stepping softly, skirting the bank so close that I touched the tombstones, and keeping my ears open to the slightest sound. I heard the screech owl hooting in the casemates, and the adders hissing in the black water of the moat, but that was all. The dead slept in the ground as tranquilly as the living in their beds. I plucked up courage to climb over the cemetery bank and to give a glance around the field of death. All was quiet, no signs whatever of the bagpipers. Then I walked all round the castle. It was locked up, and as it was after 10 o'clock, masters and servants slept like stones. Then I returned to the inn, not being able to imagine what had become of the guild, but determined to station my comrades in the path leading to the English gate, from which we could see what happened to Joseph when he reached the rendezvous at midnight at the gate of the cemetery. I found them on the bridge debating whether or not they should start for home, and declaring they could see no danger to the Iriels, because it was evident they had agreed amicably with the other bagpipers in the matter of the competition. As for what concerned Joseph, they cared little or nothing, and tried to prevent me from interfering. I told them that to my thinking the danger for all three would be when the tests were applied, for the evil intentions of the bagpipers had been plainly shown, and the Uriels, I knew, were there to protect Joseph. "Are you already sick of the enterprise?" I said. "Is it because we are only 8 to 16, and you haven't a heart for 2 inside of you?" "How do you count 8?" asked Leonard. "Do you think the head woodsman and his son would go with us against their fellow members?" "I did count wrong," I answered, "for we are really 9. Joseph won't let himself be fleeced if they make it too hot for him, and as both the Uriels carry arms, I feel quite sure they mean to defend him if they can't be hurt otherwise." "That's not the point," returned Leonard. "We are only 6, and they are 20. But there's another thing which pleases us even less than a fight. People have been talking in the inn, and each had a story to relate of these tests. The monk denounced them as impious and abominable, and though Joseph laughed at what was said, we don't feel certain there is nothing in it. They told of candidates nailed on a bier, and furnaces into which they were tripped, and red-hot iron crosses which they were made to clasp. Such things seem hard to believe, and if I were certain that that was all, I'd like to punish the fellows who are bad enough to ill-treat a neighbour in that way. Unfortunately—" There, said I see you have let yourself be scared. What is behind it all? Tell the whole, and let's either laugh at it or take warning." "This is it," said one of the lads, seeing that Leonard was ashamed to own his fears. "None of us have ever seen the devil, and we don't want to make his acquaintance." "Ho, ho!" I cried, seeing that they were all relieved, now the words were out. "So it is Lucifer himself that frightens you? Well, I'm too good a Christian to be afraid of him. I give my soul to God, and I'll be bound I'll take him by the horns. Yes, I myself, alone against the enemy of mankind, as fearlessly as I would take a goat by the beard. He has been allowed to do evil to those who fear him long enough, and it is my opinion that an honest fellow who dared to wrench off his horns could deprive him of half his power, and that would be something gained at any rate." "Faith," said Leonard, ashamed of his fears, "if you look at it that way I won't back down, and if you'll smash his horns I'll try to pull out his tail. They say it is fine, and we'll find out if it is gold or hemp." There is no such remedy against fear as fun, but I don't deny that though I took the matter on that tone, I was not at all anxious to pit myself against Georgeon, as we call the devil in our parts. I wasn't a bit more easy in mind than the rest, but for Terence's sake I felt ready to march into the jaws of hell. I had promised her, and the good God himself couldn't have turned me back now. But that's an ill way to talk. The good God, on the contrary, gave me strength and confidence, and the more anxiety I felt all that night, the more I thought on him and asked his aid. When our other comrades saw that our minds, Leonard's and mine, were made up, they followed us. To make the affair safer, I went back to the inn to see if I could find other friends who, without knowing what we were after, would follow us for fun, and if occasion came, would fight with us. But it was late, and there was no one at the Boeuf Couronné but Benoit, who was supping with the monk, Mariton, who was saying her prayers, and Joseph, who had thrown himself on a bed and was sound asleep with, I must own, a tranquillity that put us to shame. "I have only one hope," said Mariton as she got off her knees, "and that is that he will sleep over the time and not wake up till morning." "That's just like all women," cried Benoit, laughing. "They want life at the price of shame. But I gave my word to her lad to wake him before midnight, and I shall not fail to do so." "Ah, you don't love him," cried the mother. "We'll see if you push our Charlot into danger when his turn comes." "You don't know what you are talking about, wife," replied the innkeeper. "Go to bed and sleep with my boy. I promise you I'll not fail to wake yours. You would not wish him to blame me for his dishonour." "Besides," said the monk, "what danger do you suppose there is in the nonsense they are going to perform? I tell you, you are dreaming, my good woman. The devil doesn't get hold of anybody. God doesn't allow it, and you have not brought your boy up so ill that you need fear that he will get himself damned for his music. I tell you that the villainous tests of the bagpipers are really nothing worse than impious jokes, from which sensible people can easily protect themselves, and Joseph need only laugh at the demons they will set upon him, to put them all to flight." The monk's words heartened up my comrades wonderfully. "If it is only a farce," they said to me, "we will tumble into the middle of it and thrash the devil well. But hadn't we better take Benoit into our confidence? He might help us." "To tell you the truth," I said, "I am not sure that he would. He is thought a worthy man, but you never know the secrets of a family, especially when there are children by a first marriage. Stepfathers don't always like them, and Joseph has been none too amiable this evening with his. Let's get off without a word to anyone. That's best, and it is nearly time we were there." Taking the road past the church, walking softly and in single file, we posted ourselves in the little path near the English gate. The moon was so low we could creep in the shadow of the cemetery bank and not be seen, even if anyone passed quite close to us. My comrades, being strangers, had no such repugnance to the place as the villagers, and I let them go in front while I hid within the cemetery, near enough to the gate to see who entered, and also near enough to call to them when wanted. End of section 30. Section 31 of the Bagpipers by George Sand, translated by Catherine Prescott Wormley. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. 31st Evening. I waited a good long time, all the longer because the hours go so slow in company with dead folks. At last midnight struck in the church steeple, and I saw the head of a man rising beyond the low wall of the cemetery, quite near the gate. Another quarter of an hour dragged along without my seeing or hearing anything but that man, who, getting tired of waiting, began to whistle a Bourbonnais tune, whereby I knew it was Joseph, who no doubt betrayed the hopes of his enemies by seeming so cool in presence of the dead. At last another man, who was stuck close to the wall inside the gate, and whom I hadn't seen on account of the big box trees which hid him, popped his head quickly over the wall as if to take Joseph by surprise. But the latter did not stir, and said, laughing, "Well, Père Carnat, you are rather late. I came near going to sleep while waiting. Will you open the gate, or must I enter that nettle field by the breach?" "No," said Carnat, "the curate would not like it. We mustn't openly offend the church people. I will go to you." He climbed over the wall and told Joseph he must let his head and arms be covered with a very thick canvas sack, and then walk wherever he was led. "Very good," said Joseph in a contemptuous tone. "Go on." I watched them from over the wall, and saw them enter the little path to the English gate. Then I made a short-cut to the place where I had left my comrades, and found only 4 of them. The youngest had slipped off without a word, and I was rather afraid the others would do the same, for they found the time long and told me they had heard very queer noises, which seemed to come from under the earth. Presently Joseph came along, with his head covered and led by Carnat. The pair got close upon us, but turned from the path about 20 feet off. Carnat made Joseph clamber down to the edge of the moat, and we thought he meant to drown him. At once we were on our legs to stop such treachery, but in a minute more we saw they were both walking in the water, which was shallow at that place, until they reached a low archway in the wall of the castle, which was partly in the water of the moat. They passed through it, and this explained to me what had become of the others whom I had hunted for. It was necessary to do as they did, which didn't seem to me very difficult, but my comrades were hard to persuade. They had heard that the vaults of the castle ran 9 miles out into the country, as far as Deorle, and that persons who did not know their windings had been lost in them. I was forced to declare that I knew them very well, though I had never set foot there in my life, and had no idea whether they were common wine cellars or a subterraneous town, as my friends declared. I walked first without seeing where I set my feet, feeling the walls, which enclosed a narrow passage where one's head very nearly touched the roof. We advanced in this way for a short time, when a hullabaloo sounded beneath us like 40 thunderclaps rolling round the Devil's Cave. It was so strange and alarming that I stopped short to try and find out what it meant. Then I went quickly forward, not to let myself get chilled with the idea of some devil's caper telling my companions to follow me. But the noise was so loud they did not hear me, and I, thinking they were at my heels, went on and on, till, hearing nothing more, I turned to speak to them and got no answer. Not wishing to call aloud, I went back 4 or 5 steps. It was all dark. I stretched out my hands and called cautiously, "Goodbye to my valiant contingent." They had deserted me. I thought I must be pretty near the entrance, and could surely catch up with them within or without. I returned through the arch by which we had entered, and searched carefully along the little path beside the cemetery. But no, my comrades had disappeared, just like the bagpipers. It seemed as if the earth had opened and swallowed them up. I had a moment of horrid worry, thinking I must either give up the whole thing, or return to those devilish caverns and take myself all alone into the traps and terrors they were preparing for Joseph. But I asked myself whether, even if the matter concerned only him, I could quietly leave him in danger. My soul answered no, and then I asked my heart if love for Thérence wasn't quite as real a thing as one's duty to one's neighbour, and the answer I received sent me back through the dark and slimy archway, and along the subterranean passages. I won't say as gaily, but at any rate as quickly as if I were going to my own wedding. While I was feeling my way forward, I found, on my right, an opening to another passage, which I had not found before because I then felt to my left. And I thought to myself that my comrades in going out had probably found it and turned that way. I followed the passage, for there was no sign that the other way would bring me any nearer to the bagpipers. I did not find my comrades, but as for the bagpipers, I had not taken 20 steps before I heard their din much nearer than it sounded the first time. And presently a quivering kind of light let me see that I was entering a large round cave, which had 3 or 4 exits, black as the jaws of hell. I was surprised to see so clearly in a vault where there wasn't any light, but I presently noticed that gleams were coming from below through the ground I trod upon. I noticed that this ground seemed to swell up in the middle, and fearing it was not solid, I kept close to the wall, and getting near to a crevice, I lay down with my eye close to it, and saw very plainly what was going on in another cavern just below the one I was in. It was, as I afterwards learned, a former dungeon, adjoining an oubliette or black hole, the mouth of which could still be seen 30 years ago in the upper hall of the castle. I thought as much when I saw the remains of human bones at the lower end of the cave, which the bagpipers had set up in rows to terrify the candidate, with pine torches inside their skulls. Joseph was there all alone, his eyes unbound, his arms crossed, just as cool as I was not, listening contemptuously to the uproar of 18 bagpipes, which all brayed together, prolonging a single note into a roar. This crazy music came from an adjoining cave where the bagpipers were hidden, and where, as they doubtless knew, a curious echo multiplied the sound. I, who knew nothing about it then, fancied at first that all the bagpipes of Berry, Auvergne, and the Bourbonnais were collected together in that cave. When they had had enough of growling with their instruments, they began to squeal and squall themselves, and the walls echoed them, till you would have fancied they were a great troop of furious animals of all kinds. But Joseph, who was really an unusual kind of man among our peasantry, indeed I hardly ever knew his like, merely shrugged his shoulders and yawned, as if tired with such fool's play. His courage passed into me, and I began to think of laughing at the farce, when a little noise at my back made me turn my head. There I saw, at the entrance of the passage by which I had come, a figure which froze my senses. It was that of a lord of the olden time, carrying a lance and wearing an iron breastplate and leathern garments of a style no longer seen. But the most awful part of him was his face, which was actually like a death's head. I partly recovered myself, thinking it was only a disguise some of the enemy had put on to frighten Joseph, but on reflection I saw the danger was really mine, because finding me on the watch, he would surely do me some damage. However, though he saw me as plain as I could see him, he did not stir, but remained stock still like a ghost, half in shadow and half in the light that came up from below. And as this light flickered according as it was moved about, there were moments when, not seeing him, I thought he was a notion of my own brain, until suddenly he would reappear, all but his legs, which remained in darkness behind a sort of step or barrier, which made me fancy he was, as it were, floating on a cloud. I don't know how long I was tortured with this vision, which made me forget to watch Joseph, and scared me lest I was going mad in trying to do more than it was in me to perform. I recollected that I had seen in the hall of the castle an old picture which they said was the portrait of a wicked warrior, whom a lord of the castle in the olden time, who was the warrior's brother, had flung into the dungeon. The garments of leather and iron which I saw before me on that skeleton figure were certainly like those in the picture, and the notion came into my head that here was a ghost in pain, watching the desecration of his sepulchre, and waiting to show his displeasure in some way or other. What made this idea the more probable was that the ghost said nothing to me, and evidently took no notice of my presence, apparently aware that I had no evil intentions against his poor carcass. At last a noise different from all others attracted my eyes away from him. I looked back into the cave below me where stood Joseph, and something near him very ugly and very strange. Joseph stood boldly in front of an abominable creature, dressed in the skin of a dog, with horns sticking out of his tangled hair, and a red face, and claws and tail, the which beast was jumping about and making faces like one possessed of the devil. It was vile to see, and yet I wasn't the dupe of it very long, for though the creature tried to disguise his voice, I thought I recognized that of Doré Fratin, the bagpiper of Pouligny, one of the strongest and most quarrelsome men in our neighbourhood. "You may sneer as you please," he was saying to Joseph, "at me and at hell, but I am the king of all musicians, and you shall not play your instrument without my permission unless you sell me your soul." Joseph answered, "What can such a fool of a devil as you do with the soul of a musician? You have no use for it." "Mind what you say," returned the other. "Don't you know that down here you must either give yourself to the devil or prove that you are stronger than he?" "Yes, yes, I know the proverb," said Joseph. "Kill the devil or the devil will kill you." As he spoke, I saw Uriel and his father come from a dark opening into the vault and go up to the devil as if to speak to him, but they were pulled back by the other bagpipers who now showed themselves, and Carnat the elder addressed Joseph. "You have proved," he said, "that you don't fear witchcraft, and we will let you go free if you will now conform to the usual custom, which is to fight the devil, in proof that you, a Christian man, refuse to submit to him." "If the devil wants to be well thrashed," replied Joseph, "let me go at him at once, and we'll see if his skin is any tougher than mine. What weapons?" "None but your fists," replied Carnat. "It is fair play, I hope," said the head woodsman. Joseph took no time to inquire. His temper was up. Enraged by the tricks that were played on him, he sprang on the devil, tore off his horns and headdress, and caught him so resolutely round the body that he brought him to earth and fell on top of him. But he instantly got up, and I fancied he gave a cry of surprise and pain. But the bagpipers all began to play, except Uriel and his father, who stood watching the encounter with an expression of doubt and uneasiness. Joseph, meantime, was tumbling the devil about and seeming to get the better of him, but his rage seemed to me unnatural, and I feared he might put himself in the wrong through too much violence. The bagpipers seemed to help him, for instead of rescuing their comrade, who was knocked down 3 times, they marched round and round the fight, piping loudly and beating with their feet to excite him. Suddenly the head woodsman separated the combatants by levelling a blow with his stick on the devil's paws, and threatening to strike harder the second time if he was not listened to. Uriel ran to his father's side, raising his stick also, while all the others stopped walking round and piping, and a moment's silence and stillness fell on all. Then I saw that Joseph, overcome with pain, was wiping his torn hands and his face, which was covered with blood, and that he would have fainted if Uriel had not caught him in his arms, while Doré Fratin merely threw aside his trappings, panting with heat, and wiping the sweat from his forehead with a grin. "What does this mean?" cried Carnat, coming up to the head woodsman with a threatening air. "Are you a traitor to the guild? By what right do you interfere with the tests?" "I interfere at my own risk and to your shame," replied the head woodsman. "I am not a traitor, and you are evildoers, both treacherous and cruel. I suspected that you were tricking us to lead this young man here and wound him, perhaps dangerously. You hate him because you know that every one will prefer him to you, and that wherever he is heard no one will listen to your music. You have not dared to refuse him admission to the guild, because the whole country would blame you for such a crying injustice. But you are trying to frighten him from playing in the parishes you have taken possession of, and you have put him through hard and dangerous tests which none of you could have borne as long as he." "I don't know what you mean," said the old Dean, Pailloux de Verneuil, "and the blame you cast upon us here, in presence of a candidate, is unheard of insolence. We don't know how you practice initiation in your part of the country, but here we are following our customs and shall not allow you to interfere." I shall interfere, said Uriel, who was sopping Joseph's blood with his handkerchief, and had brought him back to consciousness as he held him on his knee. I neither can nor will tell of your conduct away from here, because I belong to the Brotherhood, but at least I will tell you to your faces that you are brutes. In our country we fight with the devil in jest, taking care to do no one any harm. Here you choose the strongest among you and furnish him with hidden weapons, with which he endeavours to put out the eyes and stab the veins of your victims. See, this young man is exhausted, and in the rage which your wickedness excited in him, he would have let you kill him if we had not stopped the fight. And then what would you have done? You would have flung his body into that vault, where so many other unfortunates have perished, whose bones ought to rise and condemn you for being as cruel as your former lords. These words reminded me of the apparition I had forgotten, and I turned round to see if it was still there. I could not see it, and then I bethought me of finding my way to the lower cave, where, as I began to think, I might be useful to my friends. I found the stairway at once and went down to the entrance of the vault, not trying to conceal myself, for such disputing and confusion were going on that no one paid any attention to me. The head woodsman had picked up the devil's skin coat and showed that it was covered with spikes like a comb for currying oxen, and also the mittens which the sham devil wore on his hands, in which strong nails were fastened with the points outside. The bagpipers were furious. "Here's a pretty fuss about a few scratches," cried Carnat. "Isn't it in the order of things that a devil should have claws? And this young fool who attacked him so imprudently, why didn't he know how far he could play at that game without getting his snout scraped? Come, don't pity him so much. It's a mere nothing, and since he has had enough of it, let him confess he can't play at our games, and is not fit to belong to our guild in any way." "I shall belong to it," cried Joseph, wrenching himself from Uriel's arms and showing as he did so his torn shirt and bleeding breast. "I shall belong to it in spite of you. I insist that the fight shall go on, and one of us shall be left in this cavern." "I forbid it," said the head woodsman, "and I insist that this young man shall be proclaimed victor, or I swear to bring into this place a company of bagpipers who shall teach you how to behave, and who will see justice done." "You," said Doré Fratin, drawing a sort of board knife from his belt, "you can do so if you choose, but you shall carry with you some marks on your body, so that people may believe your reports." The head woodsman and Uriel put themselves in an attitude of defence. Joseph flung himself upon Fratin to get away his knife, and I made one bound in amongst them. But before any of us could strike a blow, the figure that startled me so in the upper cavern appeared at the opening of the lower one, stretched forth his lance, and slowly advanced in a way to strike terror to the minds of the evildoers. Then, as they all paused, dumbfounded with fear and amazement, a piteous voice was heard from the depths of the dungeon, reciting the prayers for the dead. This routed the whole brotherhood. One of the pipers cried out, the dead are rising," and they all fled pell-mell, yelling and pushing through the various openings, except that to the dungeon, where stood another figure wrapped in a winding-sheet, chanting the most dismal sing-song that anybody ever heard. A minute later all our enemies had disappeared, and the warrior flinging off his helmet and mask, we beheld the jovial face of Benoit, while the monk, getting out of his winding-sheet, was holding his sides in convulsions of laughter. "May God forgive me for masquerading," he said. "I did it with the best intentions. Those rascals deserve a good lesson if it is only to teach them not to laugh at the devil, of whom they are really more afraid than those whom they threaten with him." "For my part, I felt quite certain," said Benoit, "that our comedy would put an end to theirs." Then, noticing Joseph's wounds, he grew very uneasy, and showed such feeling for him that all this, together with the succour he had brought in so timely a manner, proved to my mind his regard for his stepson, and his good heart, which I had hitherto doubted. While we examined Joseph and convinced ourselves he was not very seriously hurt, the monk told us how the butler at the castle had once said to him that he allowed the bagpipers and other societies to hold their secret meetings in the cellars of the castle. Those in which we found ourselves were too far from the inhabited parts of the castle to disturb the lady mistress of Saint-Chartier, and indeed, if it had, she would only have laughed, not imagining that any mischief could come of it. But Benoit, who suspected some evil intent, had got the same butler to give him a key to the cellars and a disguise, and that was how it was that he got these in time to avert all danger. "Well," said the head woodsman, addressing him, "thank you for your assistance, but I rather regret you came, for those fellows are capable of declaring that I asked you to do so, and consequently that I betrayed the secrets of the guild. If you will take my advice, we had better get away noiselessly. At once, and leave them to think you were really ghosts. All the more, added Benoit, that their wrath may deprive me of their custom, which is no slight matter. I hope they did not recognize Tiennet. But how the devil was it that Tiennet got here in the nick of time? Didn't you bring him? Asked Uriel. That he didn't, said I. I came on my own account, because of the stories they tell of your deviltries. I was curious to see them, but I swear to you that those fellows were too scared, and the sight of their eyes was too wide of the mark ever to have recognized me. We were about to leave when the sound of angry voices and an uproar like that of a fight was heard. Dear, dear, cried the monk, what's that now? I think they are coming back, and we have not yet done with them. Quick, let's get back into our disguises. No, said Benoit, listening. I know what it is. I met, as I came along through the castle cellars, 4 or 5 young fellows, one of whom is known to me, and that is Léonard, your Bourbonnais woodchopper, Père Bastien. Those lads were there from curiosity, no doubt, but they had got bewildered in the caverns, and I lent them my lantern, telling them to wait for me. The bagpipers must have met them, and they are giving chase. It is more likely that they are being chased themselves if there are not more than 5 of them, said Uriel. Let us go and see. We were just starting when the noise and the footsteps approached, and Carnat, Doré Fratin, and 8 others returned to the cave, having in fact exchanged a few blows with our comrades, and finding that they had to do with real flesh and blood instead of spectres, they were ashamed of their cowardice and so came back again. They reproached the Uriels for having betrayed them and driven them into an ambush. The head woodsman defended himself, and the monk tried to secure peace by taking it all upon himself, telling the bagpipers to repent of their sins. But they felt themselves in good force, for others kept coming back to their support, and when they found their numbers nearly complete, they raised their voices to a roar, and went from reproaches to threats and from threats to blows. Seeing there was no way to avoid an encounter, all the more because they had drunk a good deal of brandy while the tests were going on and were more or less intoxicated, we put ourselves in an attitude of defence, pressing one against the other, and showing front to the enemy on all sides, like oxen when a troop of wolves attack them at pasture. The monk, having already lost his morality and his Latin, now lost his patience also, and seizing the pipe of an instrument which had got broken in the scrimmage, he laid about him as hard as a man well could in defence of his own skin. Unluckily, Joseph was weakened by the loss of blood, and Uriel, who bore upon his heart the recollection of Malzac's death, was more fearful of giving blows than of receiving them. Anxious to protect his father, who sprang into the fray like an old lion, he put himself in great danger. Benoit fought very well for a man who was just out of an illness, but the truth is we were only 6 against 15 or 16, and as the blood rose anger came, and I saw our enemies opening their knives. I had only time to fling myself before the head woodsman, who, still unwilling to draw his blade, was the object of their bitterest anger. I received a wound in the arm, which I hardly felt at the moment, but which hindered my fighting on, and I thought the day was lost, when, by great good luck, my 4 comrades decided to come and see what the noise was about. The reinforcement was sufficient, and together we put to flight, for the second time and the last, our exhausted enemies, taken in the rear and ignorant how many were upon them. I saw that victory was ours, and that none of my friends were much hurt. Then, suddenly perceiving that I had got more than I wanted, I fell like a log, and neither knew nor felt another thing. End of section 31. Section 32 of The Bagpipers by Georges Sand, translated by Catherine Prescott Wormley. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. 32nd Evening. When I came to my senses, I found myself in the same bed with Joseph, and it took me some time to recover full consciousness. When I did, I saw I was in Benoit's own room, that the bed was good, the sheets very white, and my arm bound up after a bleeding. The sun was shining through the yellow bed curtains, and except for a sense of weakness, I felt no ill. I turned to Joseph, who was a good deal cut about the head, but in no way to disfigure him, and who said, as he kissed me, "Well, my Tiennet, here we are as in the old days when we fought the boys of Verneuil on our way back from catechism, and were left lying together at the bottom of a ditch. You have protected me to your hurt, just as you did then, and I can never thank you as I ought. But you know, and I think you always knew, that my heart is not as churlish as my tongue." "I have always known it," I replied, returning his kiss, "and if I have again protected you, I am very glad of it. But you mustn't take too much for yourself. I had another motive. Here I stopped, fearing I might give way and let out Terence's name. But just then a white hand drew back the curtain, and there I saw a vision of Thérence herself, leaning towards me, while Mariton went round between the bed and the wall to kiss and question her son. Thérence bent over me, as I said, and I, quite overcome and thinking I was dreaming, tried to rise and thank her for her visit and assure her I was out of danger, when there, like a sick fool and blushing like a girl, I received from her lips the finest kiss that ever recalled the dead. "What are you doing, Thérence?" I cried, grasping her hands, which I could almost have eaten up. "Do you want to make me crazy?" "I want to thank you and love you all my life," she answered, "for you have kept your word to me. You have brought my father and my brother back to me safe and sound, and I know that all you have done, all that has happened to you, is because you loved them and loved me. Therefore I am here to nurse you and not to leave you as long as you are ill." "Oh, that's good, Thérence," I said, sighing. "It is more than I deserve. Please God not to let me get well, for I don't know what will become of me afterwards." "Afterwards," said Père Bastien, coming into the room with Uriel and Brulette. "Come, daughter, what shall we do with him afterwards?" "Afterwards," said Thérence, blushing scarlet for the first time. "Yes, Thérence the sincere," returned her father, "speak as becomes a girl who never lies." "Well, father, then afterwards, I will never leave him either," she said. "Go away, all of you," I cried. "Close the curtains. I want to get up and dress and dance and sing. I'm not ill. I have paradise inside of me." And so saying, I fell back in a faint, and saw and knew nothing more except that I felt, in a kind of a dream, that Thérence was holding me in her arms and giving me remedies. In the evening I felt better. Joseph was already about, and I might have been too, only they wouldn't let me, and I was made to spend the evening in bed, while the rest sat and talked in the room, and my Thérence, sitting by my pillow, listened tenderly to what I said, letting me pour out in words all the balm that was in my heart. The monk talked with Benoit, the pair washing down their conversation with several jorums of white wine, which they swallowed under the guise of a restorative medicine. Uriel and Brulette were together in a corner, Joseph with his mother and the head woodsman in another. Uriel was saying to Brulette, "I told you, the very first day I saw you, when I showed you your token in my earring, that it should stay there forever unless the ear itself came off. Well, the ear, though slit in the fight, is still there, and the token, though rather bent, is in the ear. See? The wound will heal, the token could be mended, and everything will come all right by the grace of God." Mariton was saying to Père Bastien, "What is going to be the result of this fight? Those men are capable of murdering my poor boy if he attempts to play his bagpipe in this region." "No," replied Père Bastien, "all has happened for the best. They have had a good lesson, and there were witnesses enough outside of the Brotherhood to keep them from venturing to attack Joseph or any of us again. They are capable of doing harm when, by force or persuasion, they have brought the candidate to take an oath. But Joseph took none. He will, however, be silent because he is generous. Tiennet will do the same, and so will our young woodsmen by my advice and order. But your bagpipers know very well that if they touch a hair of our heads all tongues will be loosened and the affair brought to justice." And the monk was saying to Benoit, "I can't laugh as you do about the adventure, for I got into a passion which compels me to confess and do penance. I can forgive them the blows they tried to give me, but not those they forced me to give them. Ah, the prior of my convent is right enough to taunt me with my temper, and tell me I ought to combat not only the old Adam in me, but the old peasant too, that is, the man within me who loves wine and fighting. Wine," continued the monk, sighing and filling his glass to the brim, "is conquered, thank God. But I discovered this night that my blood is as quarrelsome as ever, and that a mere tap could make me furious." "But weren't you in a position of legitimate defence?" said Benoit. "Come, come, you spoke to those fellows in a proper manner, and you didn't strike until you were obliged to." "That's all very true," replied the friar, "but my evil genius the prior will ask me questions. He'll pump the truth out of me, and I shall be forced to confess that instead of doing it regretfully, I was carried away with the pleasure of striking like a sledgehammer, forgetting I had a cassock on my back and thinking of the days when, keeping my flocks in the Bourbonnais pastures, I went about quarrelling with the other shepherds for the mere earthly vanity of proving I was the strongest and most obstinate of them all." Joseph was silent. No doubt he felt badly at seeing two such happy couples without the right to sulk at them, after receiving such good support from Uriel and me. The head woodsman, who had a tender spot in his heart for the fellow on account of his music, kept talking to him of glory. Joseph made great efforts to witness the happiness of others without showing jealousy, and we had to admit that, proud and cold as he was, there was in him an uncommon force of will for self-conquest. He remained hidden, as I did, for some time in his mother's house, till the marks of the fray were effaced, for the secret of the whole affair was very well kept by my comrades, though Léonard, who behaved very boldly and yet judiciously, threatened the bagpipers to reveal all to the authorities of the canton if they did not conduct themselves peacefully. When we all got about again, it was found that no one was seriously damaged, except Père Carnat, whose wrist, as it proved, I had dislocated, and a parley and settlement ensued. It was agreed that Joseph should have certain parishes, and he had them assigned to him, though with no intention of using his privilege. I was rather more ill than I thought for, not so much on account of my wound, which was not severe, nor yet of the blows that had been rained on my body, but because of the bleeding the monk had done to me with the best intentions. Uriel and Brulette had the charming amiability to put off their marriage till ours could take place, and a month later the 2 weddings were celebrated. In fact, there were 3, for Benoit wished to acknowledge his publicly, and to celebrate the occasion with us. The worthy man, delighted to have had his heir so well taken care of by Brulette, tried to get her to accept a gift of some consequence, but she steadily refused, and throwing herself into Mariton's arms, she said, "Remember that this dear woman was a mother to me for more than 12 years. Do you think I can take money when I am not yet out of her debt?" "That may be," said Mariton, "but your bringing up was nothing but an honour and profit to me, whereas that of my Charlot brought you trouble and insult." "My dear friend," replied Brulette, "that very fact is all that evens our account. I would gladly have made your José happy in return for all your goodness to me, but that did not depend on my poor heart, and so to compensate you for the grief I caused him, I was bound to suffer all I did for your other child." "There's a girl for you," cried Benoit, wiping his big round eyes, which were not used to shed tears. "Yes, yes, indeed, there's a girl." And he couldn't say any more. To get even with Brulette, he was determined to pay all the costs of her wedding, and mine into the bargain. As he spared nothing and invited at least 200 guests, it cost him a pretty sum, which he paid without a murmur. The monk promised faithfully to be present, all the more because the prior had kept him on bread and water for a month, and the embargo on his gullet was raised the very day of the wedding. He did not abuse his liberty, however, and behaved in such a pleasant way that we all became as fast friends with him as Uriel and Benoit had previously been. Joseph kept up his courage till the day of the wedding. In the morning he was pale and apparently deep in thought. But as we left the church he took the bagpipe from my father-in-law's hand, and played a wedding march which he had composed that very night in our honour. It was such a beautiful piece of music, and was so applauded, that his gloom disappeared, and he played triumphantly his best dance airs all the evening, and quite forgot himself and his troubles the whole time the festivities lasted. He followed us back to Chassin, and there the head woodsman, having settled his affairs, addressed us one and all as follows. "My children, you are now happy, and rich for country folks. I leave you the business of this forest, which is a good one, and all I possess elsewhere is yours. You can spend the rest of the season here, and during that time you can decide on your plans for the future. You belong to different parts of the country, your tastes and habits are not alike. Try, my sons, both of you, to find what kind of life will make your wives happy, and keep them from regretting their marriages now so well begun. I shall return within a year. Let me have 2 fine grandchildren to welcome me. You can then tell me what you have decided to do. Take your time. A thing that seems good today may seem worse or better tomorrow." "Where are you going, father?" said Thérence, clasping him in her arms in fear. "I am going to travel about with Joseph and play our music as we go," answered Père Bastien. "He needs it, and as for me, I have hungered for it these 30 years." Neither tears nor entreaties could keep him, and that evening we escorted them halfway to Saint-Sever. There, as we embraced Père Bastien with many tears, Joseph said to us, "Don't be unhappy. I know very well he is sacrificing the sight of your happiness to my good, for he has a father's heart for me, and knows I am the most to be pitied of his children. But perhaps I shall not need him long, and I have an idea you will see him sooner than he thinks for." Then he added, kneeling before my wife and Uriel's, "Dear sisters, I have offended both of you, and I have been punished enough by my own thoughts. Will you not forgive me, so that I may forgive myself and go away more peacefully?" They both kissed him with the utmost affection, and then he came to each of us and said, with surprising warmth of heart, the kindest and most affectionate words he had ever said in his life, begging us to forgive his faults and to hold him in remembrance. We stood on a hill to watch them as long as possible. Père Bastien played vigorously on his bagpipe, turning round from time to time to wave his cap and blow kisses with his hand. Joseph did not turn round. He walked in silence, with his head down as if in thought or in grief. I could not help saying to Uriel that I saw on his face as he left us that strange look I had seen in his childhood, which in our parts is thought the sign of a man doomed to evil. Our tears were dried, little by little, in the sunshine of happiness and hope. My beautiful dear wife made a greater effort than the rest of us, for never before being parted from her father, she seemed to have lost a portion of her soul in losing him. And I saw that in spite of her courage, her love for me, and the happiness she felt in the prospect of becoming a mother, there was always something lacking for which she sighed in secret. So my mind was constantly turning on how to arrange our lives to live in future with Père Bastien, were it even necessary to sell my property, give up my family, and follow my wife wherever she wished to live. It was just the same with Brulette, who was determined to consult only her husband's tastes, especially when her old grandfather, after a brief illness, died quietly, as he had lived, protected by the care and love of his dear daughter. "Tiennet," she often said to me, "I see plainly that Berry must give way to the Bourbonnais in you and me. Uriel is too fond of this free, strong life and change of air to endure our sleepy plains. He makes me so happy I will never let him feel a secret pain. I have no family now in our parts. All my friends there, except you, have hurt me. I live only for Uriel. Where he is happy, there I am happiest." The winter found us still in the forest of Chassin. We had stripped that beautiful region of its beauty, for the old oak wood was its finest feature. The snow covered the prostrate bodies of the noble trees, flung head foremost into the river, which held them, cold and dead, in its ice. One morning Uriel and I were lunching beside a fire of brushwood which our wives had lighted to warm our soup, and we were looking at them with delight, for both were in a fair way to keep the promise they had made to Père Bastien to give him descendants, when suddenly they both cried out, and Thérence, forgetting she was not so light as she once was, sprang almost across the fire to kiss a man whom the smoke of damp leaves had hidden from our sight. It was her good father, who soon had neither arms nor lips enough to reply to our welcome. After the first joy was over, we asked him about Joseph, and then his face darkened and his eyes filled with tears. "He told you that you would see me sooner than I expected," said Père Bastien sadly. "He may have had a presentiment of his fate, and God, who softened the hard shell of his heart at that moment, no doubt counselled him to reflect upon himself." We dared not inquire further. Père Bastien sat down, opened his sack, and drew forth the pieces of a broken bagpipe. "This is all that remains of that poor lad," he said. "He could not escape his star. I thought I had softened his pride, but alas, in everything connected with music he grew daily more haughty and morose. Perhaps it was my fault. I tried to console him for his love troubles by proving to him the happiness of his art. From me at least he got the sweets of praise, but the more he sucked them, the greater his thirst. We went far, as far even as the mountains of the Morvan, where there are many bagpipers as jealous as those in these parts, not so much for their selfish interests as for their conceit in their talents. Joseph was imprudent. He used language that offended them at a supper to which they hospitably invited him with the kindest intentions. Unhappily, I was not there. Not feeling very well and having no reason to fear a misunderstanding, I stayed away. He was absent all night, but that often happened, and as I had noticed he was rather jealous of the applause people were pleased to give my old ditties, I was apt not to go with him. In the morning I went out, still not feeling well, and I heard in the village that a broken bagpipe had been picked up at the edge of a pond. I ran to see it and knew it at a glance. Then I went to the place where it was found, and breaking the ice of the pond, I found his poor body quite frozen. There were no marks of violence on it, and the bagpipers swore that they had parted from him, soberly and without a quarrel, about a league from the spot. I searched in vain for the cause of his death. The place was in a very wild region, where the law fears the peasant and the peasant fears naught but the devil. I was forced to content myself with their foolish remarks and reasons. In those parts they firmly believe a great deal that we should laugh at here. For instance, they think you can't be a musician without selling your soul to hell, and that Satan tears the bagpipe from the player's hands and breaks it upon his back, which drives him wild and maddens him, and then he kills himself. That is how they explain the revenge which bagpipers often take upon each other, and the latter never contradict, for it suits them to be feared and to escape all consequences. Indeed, all musicians are held in such fear and disrepute that I could get no attention to my complaints, and if I had remained in the neighbourhood I might even have been accused of summoning the devil to rid me of my companion." "Alas," said Brulette, weeping, "my poor José, my poor dear companion. Good God, what are we to say to his mother?" "We must tell her," said Père Bastien sadly, "not to let Charlotte take a fancy to music. It is too harsh a mistress for folks like us. We have not head enough to stand on the heights to which it leads without turning giddy." "Oh, father," cried Thérence, "if you would only give it up! God knows what misfortunes it may yet bring upon you." "Be comforted, my darling," said Père Bastien. "I have given it up. I return to live with my family, to be happy with my grandchildren, whom I dream of already as they dance at my knee. Where shall we settle ourselves, my dear children?" "Where you wish," said Thérence. "Where our husbands wish," said Brulette. "Where my wife wishes," I cried. "Where you all wish," said Uriel. "Well," said Père Bastien, "as I know your likings and your means, and as, moreover, I bring you back a bit of money, I have been thinking, as I trudged along, that we could all be satisfied. When you wish the peach to ripen, you mustn't pull out the stone. The peach stone is the property which Tiennet owns at Nohant. We will buy other land that adjoins it, and build a good house for all of us. I shall be content to watch the wheat fields, glad not to fell God's noble trees, but to make my little songs in the olden fashion at evening by my door, among mine own, instead of drinking the wine of others and making jealousies. Uriel likes to roam, and his wife just now is of the same turn of mind. They can undertake such enterprises as we have now finished in this forest, where I see you have worked well, and they can spend the fine season in the woods. If their young family is in the way, Thérence has strength and heart enough to manage a double nest, and you will all meet together in the autumn with increased pleasure, until my son, long after he has closed my eyes, will feel the need of resting all the year round, as I feel it now." All that my father-in-law said came to pass, just as he advised and prophesied. The good God blessed our obedience, and as life is a pasty mixed of sadness and content, poor Mariton often came to us to weep, and the worthy monk as often came to laugh. End of section 32. End of The Bagpipers by George Sand, translated by Catherine Prescott Wormley.